I came home expecting a quiet evening, but what I found shattered my world. My wife, Holly, lay down on the kitchen floor, the smell of gunpowder still lingering in the air. In that moment, I knew. Someone wanted our lives. They thought they could take everything from me, but they underestimated my resolve. Now, I'm on a mission to uncover the truth. And I won't rest until I see those responsible brought to justice. This isn't just about revenge, it's about survival. They took their shot, and now it's my turn. Detectives Olson and Barron were chatting in the hallway. I had just shared my story again that night when Detective Barron asked Detective Olson to go outside the room with him. I could hear them talking in the hallway. It felt like the problem I had fallen into on Tuesday was just getting worse. I had told the detectives the truth. Everything I said was true. It just didn't happen exactly the way I explained it. What I didn't share was something that happened by chance, but I knew no one would believe me, so I decided to keep that part quiet. I just hoped the two detectives wouldn't figure it out. Riverton, Missouri is located by the Des Moines River, 10 miles from where it meets the Mississippi River. The city is located on the southwest side of the river. A tall wall 20 feet high keeps the river at bay. This wall has kept the city safe from floods many times. The town of Riverton has about 42,000 people. This number has stayed the same since World War II ended. The biggest job provider in Riverton used to be Riverton Plastics, but in 1995 it was taken over by Pace Automotive Plastics, a big company from Detroit. PAP makes plastic parts for cars, and it is where I work. My name is Tom Blanchard, and I grew up in Riverton. I've lived in Riverton my whole life, except for 4 years when I went to the University of Missouri to study electrical engineering. After I graduated in 1997, PAP offered me a job. I got some better job offers, but I really wanted to stay in Riverton. So I took a job as an information systems specialist in the IS department at PAP. My main job was to make sure the company's computer network worked well. My dad was an orthodontist, and my mom was an English teacher at Riverton Central High School. They both retired early in 2000. Now they love going on ocean cruises, so they moved to Fort Lauderdale, Florida. This way, they can find good last-minute deals on empty cabins on cruise ships. Since they retired, they go on a 4- or 7-day cruise about every 3 months. The good thing for me was that my parents sold me their house. It was the house where I grew up, and they sold it for much less than what it was worth. Before that, I had been renting an apartment in town. My brother Jack, who is 2 years older than me, was living and working in St. Louis. He didn't care about the house or living in Riverton, so he was fine with my parents selling it to me. After coming back from college, my life in Riverton settled into a nice routine. Every morning, I woke up at 6 o'clock and got to work by 7:30. I brought my lunch in a brown bag, enjoying it at noon. I left work at 5:30 p.m. and headed out for dinner. Most weeks, 3 or 4 times, I ate at the Riverside Diner. This diner was located by the river and had a lovely view of the Des Moines River and the land in Iowa across from it. I liked to sit in a booth by the window where I could see the boats on the river and the fishermen along the bank. Before I met Holly Albertson, I didn't have any serious relationships. I mostly went out on Saturday nights. My dates were simple, dinner and a movie. Sometimes they ended with a bit of closeness, but nothing too serious. In January 2002, I got a new job as manager of information systems at Pace Automotive Plastics in Riverton. It was Friday after my big promotion. I had just come back from a week of meetings at the PAP office in Detroit. I stopped by the diner to grab a bite before heading home. I took my usual seat by the window when she walked up to my table. I knew all the waitresses at Riverside, but I had never seen this one before. She was tall, around 5'10", and her long, dark brown hair was tied back in a ponytail. Her big hazel eyes were the best part of her lovely face. As she put a glass of water on the table, I quickly looked at her name tag. "Hi, Holly. When did you start working here?" I asked. Holly stepped back from the table and looked at me with concern. "Why do you want to know?" "Because you're new here, right?" I asked. "When did you start?" Holly replied, "I started Monday." She still looked a bit unsure of me. I figured that since she was new to the job, she might be feeling a bit nervous. That could explain how she reacted to my question. After what felt like a long wait, Holly finally asked if I was ready to order. I chose the Friday special, which was fried catfish, coleslaw, French fries, and hush puppies. I don't think Holly and I said more than 2 words before I went away. I found Holly to be nice-looking, but I'm not the kind of guy who feels the need to know every pretty woman I meet. I forgot about her right after I left the diner that night. When I came back to the diner on Saturday for dinner, I didn't even think about whether she would be there or not. I sat at my usual table by the window, watching a big tugboat push a barge up the river. While I gazed outside, a glass of water was placed in front of me. I turned to see my waitress and recognized her right away. "Good evening, Holly. It's nice to see you again. How are you tonight?" I said in a friendly way. Holly looked at me with a hint of doubt and asked, "Are you ready to order?" It felt like, for some reason, Holly didn't really like me. I didn't know why, but I had learned that no matter how hard you try, you can't make everyone happy with you. So I chose not to stress about it. I ordered the fried chicken special and didn't try to talk to Holly anymore. On Monday evening, I returned to the diner, hoping Holly wouldn't be there or wouldn't be serving my table. I was watching a young man catch a big catfish from the river when she spoke to me. Her words had a sharpness that surprised me. "Why are you following me?" she snapped. "Following you? You appear out of nowhere and then you keep coming back to my area," she said. "Are you stalking me?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Stalking you? You think I'm stalking you just because I sat in your area 3 times? Don't get carried away," I replied. Her accusation made me really angry. "You've only been here for a week. I have been coming to this diner 3 or 4 times a week for the last 4 years, and I always sit at one of these tables by the windows. If you don't believe me, you can ask any of the other waitresses. They all know me," I said. "Just so you know, I will keep coming here and sitting by the windows. If you don't want to wait on me, you can either choose a different area or decide to leave. Please either take my order or send another waitress." Holly looked a bit nervous and quickly left. A minute later, I saw her chatting with Carol and Jean, 2 other waitresses, by the kitchen door. She pointed at me and seemed to be listening to what they were saying. 2 minutes later, she returned to my table with a menu and a glass of water. "I'm really sorry for how I acted. I guess I'm still a bit on edge. I just moved to this town and I don't know anyone. Carol told me this place felt like a second home, but now I feel a bit silly." "It's okay," I said. "Let's try again. I'm Tom Blanchard. I come here 3 or 4 times a week. Once you get to know me, you'll see I'm really not that scary." "I'm Holly Albertson," she replied. Holly and I didn't start dating right away. I kept going to the diner 3 or 4 times a week, and Holly usually served me. As we talked more, we became friends. At first, Holly didn't share much about herself, but I learned she had gone to college in New Jersey. She didn't say which school or what she studied, though. Holly grew up with her mom, who sadly died in a car accident a couple of years ago. Holly had never known her dad. We talked a lot about books and movies. Holly was really smart, so it surprised me that she worked as a waitress in a diner. Still, I didn't ask her about it. After 3 months, I finally invited her to dinner. We chose a different place, not the riverside, and then we went to watch a movie. Afterward, we went somewhere to relax. It was then that I asked her why she thought I might be following her. "I used to live in New Jersey before I moved here," Holly replied. "The man I was living with was mean. When I tried to end our relationship, he said he would hurt me. One night, while he was asleep, I packed a suitcase with my things and escaped. I stayed in a motel that night. In the morning, I took all the money from my bank account. After that, I began driving west. My car stopped working when I reached Riverton. While I waited for it to be fixed, I noticed a help wanted sign in the window of the diner. I quickly decided to apply for the job. If I got it, I would stay here for a bit. When you came back the next week, you acted like you knew my name. You asked how long I had worked at the diner, and it made me nervous. I wondered if Mike had sent someone to look for me. Then you returned the following night and came again a few nights later. It really frightened me. "I knew your name because of your name tag," I said. I figured that out later. "Do you still think Mike? Is that his name? Do you think he might be trying to find you?" "No. Looking back, I don't think he'd bother. He liked to date around, so he probably had someone else before I even got to Riverton. Plus, I don't think he'd pay someone to search for me. It was just that when I arrived here, I didn't know anyone, and I felt really scared. I'm not afraid anymore. As I drove her home that night, she smiled and said she had fun. I nodded and said I enjoyed it as well. She softly kissed me on the lips and said goodnight. When she shut her apartment door, I could still feel her kiss on my lips. I had kissed many girls before with more excitement, but none had made me crave another kiss like that one. After our second date, we parked in front of Holly's apartment building and shared some sweet moments together. I'm feeling so warm right now, and I'm worried that if we keep going, I won't be able to stop later, she said. I really like you, but I'm not ready to take things to the next level on our second date. I didn't want to rush things, so I decided to wait until Holly felt comfortable. It was on our fifth date that she felt ready. That night, when I took her home, she asked me to come into her apartment. This was the first time I had been inside. I had come to her door to pick her up and bring her home before, but she hadn't invited me in back then. I noticed how important her invitation was. Holly filled our glasses with wine and gently clinked mine with hers before taking a drink. Then she set her glass down and smiled at me. "What do you want for breakfast tomorrow?" she asked. "I have bacon and eggs or cereal." "Are you really sure?" I replied. "Yes, I'm sure." "I'll have bacon and eggs then." Holly took my hand and led me to her bedroom. I kissed her softly and whispered, "Do you like how I hold you close?" "Yes, I really do. It feels nice," she replied. I asked her, "Can you tell me what you enjoy?" "I love how you're close to me," she said. "You make me feel warm inside." Holly later told me that she was surprised by the things she had said, but she liked how those words made her feel. Soon I noticed that she was reaching a high point of pleasure, and it was different from anyone else I had ever been with. Holly kept saying, "Please be with me. Yes, be with me strongly. I'm really feeling this moment." "Oh, wow, that feels amazing." Just after that, I reached a peak of happiness that I couldn't remember ever feeling before. For a moment, I thought nothing could be better than this. After it was over, we simply held each other close. There were no more silly talks, just the warm feeling of being together. At breakfast the next morning, Holly shared more about her life before. She had studied law and earned a degree, but because of a difficult time that she didn't want to discuss, she didn't want to work as a lawyer anymore. I told Holly she should find a job that matches her education instead of working as a waitress. I don't think there's anything wrong with being a waitress, but I feel it's not the best fit for someone as educated as Holly. Holly listened to my advice. A few weeks later, she got a job as the assistant to the head librarian at the Riverton Library. The head librarian was in her 60s and planned to retire in a couple of years, so Holly was chosen to be her successor. After dating for about 4 months, I asked Holly to move in with me. She was more than happy to say yes, and in May of 2005, Holly became my wife. When we got married, Holly and I decided to wait a few years before having children. We were in a good financial place, but we wanted to save even more money. This way, Holly could take some time off to be a stay-at-home mom. We set a specific amount we wanted to save. We decided that once we reached that goal, we would start our family. A few months later, one evening, John Dixon came to visit me. John and I went to high school together, and we have stayed friends over the years. We took a few minutes to chat before he got to the reason for his visit. "Tom, I have a chance that I think you might like. It could help you earn some extra money if you're interested," John said. "I'm not selling Amway products for you, John," I replied with a smile. I was joking because I knew he would find my Amway comment funny. John works at the local phone company. A few years ago, he and I were both contacted by an Amway seller. We were not interested in what he was offering. "What do you know about Amway?" he asked with a laugh. "Don't worry, it's not what you think. This is something great for you, and it doesn't need any money to get started. My company has just begun providing fast DSL internet service to our phone customers, and we need installers. Your job would be to visit the customer's house, change their connection to the digital signal, and set up a DSL modem. After that, you would set up the modem and install some software on their computer. In the end, you would need to ensure that the customer has a digital filter set up wherever they have an old device linked to their phone line." John mentioned that since most of the work would happen at people's homes, most installations would take place in the evenings or on Saturdays. This way, it wouldn't affect my regular job. Holly and I talked about the job offer, and we agreed I should accept it. I could do this easily and make a few extra $100 each week. This would help me until things got less busy. Starting the next week, I began installing DSL 2 or 3 nights a week and sometimes on Saturdays. At first, I worried that Holly would feel lonely being home alone so often, but she found a great way to spend her time. She started working as a volunteer at the high school, helping others with reading and writing while I was out. In the 3 years since we got married, life had been really good. Our marriage was strong. I loved Holly so much. I couldn't imagine a more caring wife. We had saved up enough money and started to talk about when to begin having a baby. We agreed to start trying in July, hoping to welcome our little one in March or April. Last January, my brother Jack got exciting news. His job was sending him to Paris for 2 years. To get ready for his move, Jack sold me his 2006 Mustang. We packed up all of his things, including his furniture, motorcycle, riding clothes, and some extra clothes he wouldn't need right now. We put everything into a storage unit that was 10 feet by 15 feet. Jack rented this locker in Riverton. He gave me the key combination and asked me to watch over his things. I felt very happy for Jack. I could tell he was really looking forward to his new job in Paris. Most of all, I was glad that he gave me a good price on the Mustang. Evenings were my favorite time. That's when Holly and I would sit together, unwind with a drink, and chat about our day. This past March was a hectic month for us. I felt like I was out doing DSL installations nearly every night, while Holly was busy with the reading volunteers and had the job of counting everything in the library, including the books and furniture. One Friday evening, after a long week where Holly had to work late each night on the inventory, we finally had some time to relax. We were sitting together, enjoying a drink and talking about our week. Holly had just shared some stories about her time at the library and the inventory. Then she turned to me and asked, "How was your week?" "It was a pretty good week for me," I said with a smile and started to laugh. Except for 3 DSL installations that were quite unusual. Most of the DSL setups I did were in people's homes, and I often encountered odd situations. Holly liked hearing my stories about the unusual things that sometimes happened. Monday night, I went to the old house at the corner of 3rd and Utica. "That old Victorian?" Holly asked. "Yes, that's the one," I replied. I pressed the doorbell, and I heard a voice from the back of the house telling me to come in. As I stepped inside, I saw newspapers spread out on the floor leading to the kitchen. Nobody came to say hello, so I mentioned my name and the reason I was there. Then someone in the kitchen called for me to come over. As I glanced at the newspapers spread out on the floor, I thought maybe they had just cleaned the floors and didn't want me to step on them yet. So I carefully walked across the room, only stepping on the newspapers. I was halfway across when I realized my mistake. The papers weren't there for me to walk on. They were meant to hide some messes made by my client's 3 puppies in the living room. The dogs went to the bathroom on the floor? No, they made little piles of poop. Oh, gross. I felt really awkward trying to tell the customer why I stepped in the mess. The customer wasn't very happy, and when I got home, I decided to throw those shoes away. Did the customer complain? No. I think they understood it was partly their fault for not being at the door to warn me about the mess. So, on Wednesday evening, I had a job at the new condos on the north side of town by the river. A man comes to the door wearing just boxer shorts and a sleeveless shirt. He was very short, heavy-set, and bald. He had on glasses that looked like they were made from 2 thick drink bottles. At the same time, he was eating a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. The jelly was dripping down his hand to his wrist, and there was a large spot of jelly on his shirt. He reminded me a bit of Danny DeVito, and when he talked, he sounded like Truman Capote. I almost laughed out loud. "That's a funny image," Holly said. The place had very little furniture. There was no kitchen table or chairs, and only 2 chairs in the living room. His computer was on a card table in one of the bedrooms. "Well, he was probably just moving in," Holly said. That's what I thought, too. As I sat down at his computer to set up the DSL modem, I noticed a gun lying next to the keyboard. He really left a gun on the table where you had to work. Yes. I asked him to move it, but instead of taking it away, he asked if I was scared of guns. I said I wasn't scared, but I didn't like having the gun so close while I was working. He told me it wasn't loaded and then asked if I knew what type of gun it was. It looked like the guns you see in police shows on TV, so I guessed it was a 9mm. It turned out I was right. He told me I could check if it was loaded. I didn't know how to do that, so he just kept eating his sandwich while explaining. He showed me how to take out the clip and pull the slide back to check if the gun was empty. The clip was empty, and there was nothing in the chamber, too. I tried to give the gun back to him, but he said he didn't want it to get messy with peanut butter and jelly. Instead, he asked me to put the clip back in and leave the gun on the table. Did he say why he left his gun out? Holly asked. No, I think he just got it to feel more powerful, I replied. You would think he would put it away since you were coming to fix his computer, Holly said. You would think, I agreed. Maybe he placed it on the table to see how I'd respond. As I mentioned, he was just a peculiar little man. What else took place? Nothing much. I got his computer working and connected to the internet, then I left. I'm not sure I like that story. I don't like guns, and I'm not comfortable with you being alone with someone like that. He was harmless, I replied. Even so, I still don't like it. You said you had 3 stories, Holly pointed out. The last job was on Thursday night. It was in an old farmhouse on Old Hawley Road. When I drove into the driveway, 2 big dogs came running out to the car and stood by my door, growling at me. I had to sit in the car until their owner came out and called them away. When I finally got out, the dogs sniffed me and then calmed down. By the time I reached the porch, both dogs looked friendly. But there was a problem. When I tried to pet one, the other would growl at me. The owner just laughed and said, Don't worry about it, they just get a bit jealous of each other. Were you scared? Yeah, a little. These dogs were big enough to take me down in just a few bites. When I walked into the house, it was a mess. There was cat hair covering the furniture, and it smelled terrible. The odor was so strong that I had a hard time breathing. When I sat down at the computer to work, the guy's little boy, who was just 2 years old, came over. He stood really close and watched everything I did. The guy chuckled and said, Baby Tommy wants to see what you're doing. It might have been funny if the kid wasn't wearing such a full diaper. The smell was so strong that it actually made my eyes tear up and almost made me feel sick. I just couldn't believe the dad didn't see that the kid needed a diaper change. I had just finished working on the home page for the guy when his wife walked in. She quickly saw that the kid needed a diaper change and asked her husband why he hadn't done it. He replied, Tommy wanted to watch. Right, little one? As soon as I stepped outside, I took in fresh air so quickly that I almost felt dizzy. Holly leaned over and gave me a gentle kiss. You poor thing, she said. I really enjoy your stories, but it feels unfair that my days are never as fun or exciting as yours. Fun? I would gladly take dog mess and smelly diapers over your busy days any time. Holly gave me a kiss and said, I'm sorry your week was so hard. Maybe this will cheer you up. Then Holly smiled at me, making me feel better. We ended up having dinner really late that night. That was 3 months ago. Things have calmed down since then. I have been doing fewer DSL installs. Since we reached our savings goal, Holly stopped taking her birth control pills 2 weeks ago. Now, we are trying to start a family. Everything in my life was wonderful until this past Tuesday. On Tuesday morning, Holly and I shared breakfast. Just as I was leaving, Holly asked me when I would be back. I don't have any plans for tonight, so I should be home by 5:30, I replied. Why? I was thinking we could have dinner quickly and then get back to our plans for a family. That sounds like a good idea to me, I replied. Oh, I almost forgot. Can you stop by J.C. Penney's and get my order? What did you order from Penney's? Something that might be useful tonight, Holly said. All right, I'll grab it during my lunch break. Thank you, honey. Love you. Love you too. I have to go now. At 5 o'clock, I turned off my computer, cleaned up my desk, and started my drive home. I was more than halfway there when I suddenly remembered that I had forgotten to pick up Holly's catalog order at Penney's. To get to the Riverton Mall, where the J.C. Penney store was, I would need to turn around and drive back past my office. I thought about just going home and telling Holly I could pick up the order on Wednesday instead. I turned around and went back to Penney's because I remembered what Holly had said about her buy being useful that evening. I thought it was something special. I called Holly from Penney's to let her know I was running late, but she didn't pick up. I decided not to leave a message. When I got home at 6:35, I saw Holly's car in the garage. I was a bit surprised when I walked into the house because it was so quiet. Holly usually played music when she was home alone. There was no music playing, and when I called for Holly, she didn't reply. Then I noticed a smell. It felt familiar, but I couldn't tell what it was at first. Then I realized. It smelled like someone had set off a firecracker inside the house. Holly. Still no answer. Holly, are you here? Once more I heard nothing. I started to feel anxious as I walked through the house. The smell grew stronger as I moved closer to the kitchen. I had a feeling that something bad was waiting for me in the kitchen. I put my briefcase and the shopping bag from JCPenney down on the sofa and headed for the kitchen door. My heart raced as I took a deep breath and pushed myself to walk into the kitchen. What I saw will always stay with me. Holly was lying on the floor in a pool of blood. It looked like she had collapsed while trying to get out the back door. She was lying on her left side with her left arm reaching through the partly opened door. I called her name as I moved carefully across the room, but Holly did not answer. I gently placed her head in my lap and felt for her pulse on her neck. Then I took out my phone and dialed 911. Her pulse was weak, but she was still alive. 911 operator, what's your emergency? I need help. My wife. I think she's been hurt. What's your address? I told the operator my address. Who am I speaking with? Tom Blanchard. Please hurry. I think she needs help. Help is coming. Now stay on the line with me. Can you tell me what happened? I don't really know. I got home from work and found her on the floor. There's blood everywhere. Try to stay calm, Mr. Blanchard. Is your wife breathing? I think so. I can feel a weak heartbeat. Please come fast. Help will be there in a few minutes. Can you tell me how you know your wife was hurt? I'm not sure. It's just the smell and all this blood. What smell? It smells like a firecracker in the kitchen. Why are you asking so many questions? My wife is in trouble. She needs help. Please stay calm, Mr. Blanchard. Help is on the way. At last, I heard the sirens. I carefully placed Holly's head down and rushed to the door. Mr. Blanchard? Who hurt your wife? What? I don't know. I wasn't here when it happened. As the sirens got louder, I ran outside to wave them down. I still had my phone, but I wasn't paying attention to the 911 operator and her never-ending questions. The first vehicle to arrive was a fire truck, followed closely by a police car. The paramedics were still taking their gear from the emergency truck when the ambulance showed up. The police officer who came with the paramedics was the first to get to me. "Where is the injured person?" he asked as he walked closer. The two paramedics came along as I guided the officer into the kitchen. The paramedics quickly started helping Holly while the police officer began to ask me questions. What's your name? Tom Blanchard. What's the victim's name? Holly Blanchard. Is she your wife? Yes. Can you explain what happened? I don't know. I found her like that when I got home. Is that your wife's blood on your hands and clothes? Yes. I knelt down on the floor next to her to feel for a pulse while I called 911. Did you see anyone leaving the house when you got home? The officer asked. No. Do you own a gun, Mr. Blanchard? He continued. No. At that moment, more police arrived. One man who was not in a uniform seemed to take charge. He gave instructions to the other officers and then walked over to me. I'm Detective David Olson. Are you Mr. Blanchard? He asked. Yes, I replied. Detective Olson looked to be about 50 years old. He was about 5 feet 6 inches tall and probably weighed around 160 pounds. His silver hair was thin on top. Please tell me what happened here. I don't know. I got home and found my wife on the floor. As I turned to show where I found Holly, I saw the paramedics lifting her onto a stretcher. They had tubes from 3 IV bags already giving her fluids. I looked at the large spot of blood on the floor where Holly had been lying, and I suddenly felt weak. I felt myself starting to lean down, but Detective Olson caught my arm and helped me stay upright. Are you okay? He asked. I'm feeling a bit dizzy. I think I need to sit. Detective Olson came with me to the living room where I sat on the couch. It didn't take long for me to feel better. The detective was about to ask more questions when one of the paramedics said they were ready to take Holly to the hospital. Can we talk later? I asked. I need to go with my wife. That's fine. I'll meet you at the hospital soon. I don't clearly remember the next hour. I can't recall getting into the ambulance, but I do remember holding Holly's weak hand as we hurried to Riverton Memorial Hospital. Most of what happened in the emergency room is a blur. I do remember a nurse telling me to step back from Holly and saying I should go to the waiting room. The name waiting room seems just right. What was I waiting for? Maybe good news or bad news? I lost track of time as I sat there alone. Someone finally came to talk to me. I couldn't remember who he was, but I figured he was one of the doctors who had helped Holly in the emergency room. "Mr. Blanchard, we have taken care of your wife and she is now going to surgery," he said. "Will she be okay?" I asked. "I can't say yet. We still don't know how bad her injuries are. We'll find out more when she finishes surgery." "How long will that take?" "It could be an hour, or it might take a few hours. It all depends on how bad her injuries are inside. I'm sorry I can't give you better answers." They then directed me to another waiting room. On my way there, I stopped in the bathroom. When I looked in the mirror, I suddenly felt sick. I barely made it to a toilet before I started to throw up. Once my stomach felt better, I looked in the mirror again. The front of my shirt and pants had blood on them, and my hands were also covered. Seeing my bloody reflection made me feel sick again, but it went away quickly. I managed to wash the blood off my hands, but I couldn't clean my shirt or pants. I had been waiting in the waiting room for just over an hour when Detective Olson walked in. "Any updates?" he asked. "She's in surgery. They said it might take a few hours before I hear anything. How are you holding up?" "I think I'm just getting by on excitement and coffee right now. Would you mind if I asked you some questions? Does it really matter if I mind or not? I understand this is hard for you, but we need to go through this." "I'm sorry. Go ahead and ask your questions. Do you have a gun?" "I already told the officer at the house that I don't have a gun." "Did that officer check your hands for gunshot residue?" "Gunshot residue?" "It's the leftover material when you shoot a gun," Detective Olson explained. "We just need to confirm this for our investigation. So did the officer check you?" "No." "Did you wash your hands?" I lifted my hands so Detective Olson could see them. They were stained with blood. I needed to clean them. "We can get your clothes later. We can check them." "Okay." Detective Olson kept asking me questions for the next 2 hours. It felt like he was asking the same things again and again, just in different ways. It was clear that I was his main suspect, and he was trying to make me confess. This really worried me, but there was nothing I could do about it. I believed that when they saw all the facts, they would understand that I didn't try to hurt Holly. It was 8:45 when the doctor finally came out to speak with me. "Mr. Blanchard, I am Dr. Shaw." I looked at his expression, hoping to find out if he brought good news or bad. "How is my wife?" I asked anxiously. "We have done everything we can for now," he said. "Your wife was shot twice. One bullet came in from the back on her right side. It went through her right lung and came out between her 4th and 5th ribs. The second bullet hit her right side and struck the 6th rib. When it hit the rib, it broke apart and caused a lot of harm inside. We managed to fix most of the damage. Mrs. Blanchard was in shock when she arrived and fell into a deep sleep during the surgery. We can't say for sure if she will get better or not right now. How long will it take to find out?" "It might take a few days, or it could take longer," Dr. Shaw replied. "We just need to stay positive." "When can I visit her?" "They will bring her from the recovery room to intensive care in a few hours. It might be a good idea for you to go home, get some rest, and come back in the morning. There probably won't be any big change in her condition overnight." I felt lost. I didn't want to leave Holly alone at the hospital, but I also didn't want to spend the whole night in the waiting room. I turned to Dr. Shaw and asked, "If anything changes, will someone call me right away?" "Absolutely," he replied. Then I looked over at Detective Olson. "Are you done asking me questions?" "If so, I think I'll head home now," I replied. "Is there another place you can stay tonight?" Detective Olson asked. "You can't go to your house right now. It's a crime scene." "I'll just get a hotel room, but I need to go home first to grab some clothes," I said. "I'll have an officer take you home and wait while you change," he said. "He'll need to put your clothes in a bag and take them to our lab." I briefly imagined the police lab from the CSI TV show and almost chuckled at the thought of what the Riverton Police Department might really look like. But that thought vanished fast when I remembered Holly lying on the kitchen floor surrounded by her blood. I felt my legs getting weak, and I had to sit down while Detective Olson called the station to ask for someone to drive me home. When I arrived home, there were still police officers there. They didn't let me go into the kitchen, and an officer walked with me wherever I went in the house. The officer who brought me waited in the room while I changed my clothes. He then put everything I was wearing, including my shoes, socks, and undergarments, into a bag. I wanted to take a shower, but I didn't want anyone watching, so I decided to wait until I got to my hotel. The officer kept a close eye on me as I packed some clothes into a suitcase. Then, he drove me to the Motel 8 on Broad Street. When I woke up on Wednesday morning, the surprise that had kept me feeling dazed the day before was gone, and I could see things clearly. I realized I might really lose Holly. I still couldn't understand why someone would want to hurt her. Was it a random attack, or did someone we know do this? Every few minutes the weight of what happened would hit me, and I would start to cry. I called my job to say I wouldn't come in, and then I called the police station. Detective Olson wasn't there yet, but I found an officer who was able to help me. I was informed that my car was ready, and I could go home to pick it up, but I couldn't enter the house until the investigation was finished. I took a taxi to the house, got my car, and drove to the hospital. I was allowed to visit Holly for 10 minutes every 2 hours, always with a police officer present. Holly looked very pale, and her face was swollen. I was told that her condition had not changed since I left the hospital the night before. Many friends from PAP and some of Holly's friends from the library and diner came to the hospital to show their support. Detective Olson arrived at the hospital around 4 o'clock. He seemed to want to know if I wanted to change anything I had said during our questions on Tuesday night. He finally left me alone around 7 in the evening. At 7:15, I decided to go to the Riverside Diner to have a meal. I just couldn't eat in the hospital cafeteria for the third time that day. I had just parked my car in the diner's lot when my phone started ringing. "Mr. Blanchard, this is Detective David Olson." "What is it now?" I replied. "I think you might want to know that we believe we have found the gun." "The gun used to shoot my wife?" "Yes." "Where did you find it?" "It was tucked away under a pile of newspapers in your garage." "Why would he hide the gun there?" "Who are you talking about?" "Who is who?" "You just asked why he would hide the gun in your garage." "Who is he?" Detective Olson asked. "The person who shot my wife. Do you know who he is?" "No, I don't know who he is." "Then how can you be sure it's a man and not a woman?" "I'm not sure. I just find it hard to imagine a woman acting like that." "Well, the police have cleaned the gun to check for fingerprints, and they are shooting it to see if it was the gun that shot your wife." "Good. Please tell me what you discover," I replied. "Actually, I called because I need you to come to the station." "Right now?" "I haven't eaten since lunch. I was just going out to get dinner." "Where are you right now?" Detective Olson asked. "I'm in the parking lot at the Riverside Diner." "Great, I'm nearby. I'll be there in a few minutes." Detective Olson hung up before I could say anything more. I slammed the car door and leaned against it, waiting for him. I felt someone coming up behind me. Before I could turn around, something hard was pressed against my head. "Don't move or you're dead," a voice said from behind me. Was I being robbed? Was it a carjacking or was I being arrested? "Who are you and what do you want?" I asked. The man behind me hit my head with his gun and pushed me against my car. "Be quiet and just do what I say," he said. "Give me your keys and your phone." I handed the keys and my phone behind me, and he grabbed them quickly. I started to feel scared. I was worried about what would happen when Detective Olson got there. Would there be gunfire? Would I make it through the next few minutes? I had a lot on my mind, and soon I would find answers to my questions. When I spotted the brown Ford Crown Victoria coming into the parking lot, my heart raced and my palms felt sweaty. I wasn't the only one who noticed the brown Ford was a police car. Someone behind me said, "Oh no, it's a cop." The man with the gun crouched down next to me, pressing the gun against my side. He warned me, "Don't move and don't say a word." Detective Olson saw me right away when he stepped out of his car and walked over. "You didn't need to wait for me out here," he said. The man with the gun moved behind me, using the car and my body as a shield from Detective Olson. The detective was about 15 feet away when the gunman slid his weapon up my side, pushed it under my arm, and fired 3 quick shots. The gun must have had a silencer because the quiet thwap, thwap, thwap I heard was just barely louder than the traffic noise on River Street. 3 bullets struck Detective Olson in the chest. He fell onto his back and lay still. I was looking at Detective Olson's body in the parking lot when the shooter turned me around and shoved me toward the open trunk of a red Toyota Camry. This was my first clear view of my attackers. The man who shot Detective Olson was short, about 5'5", very heavy and completely bald. The other man looked completely different. He stood around 6 feet 5 inches tall and probably weighed about 170 pounds when he was wet. I couldn't help but think of them as Porky and Slim. Slim, who had a gun, told me to get into the trunk of the Camry. Porky then got into my Mustang. As I climbed into the trunk, I heard my Mustang start up and peel out of the parking lot. Once I was inside the trunk, Slim tied my wrists and ankles with duct tape and then closed the lid. I felt very scared when I noticed a shovel in the trunk with me. Why would these two men who had just hurt a police officer and taken me need a shovel? With my hands tied behind my back, I couldn't open the trunk or use the shovel to protect myself. I did my best to stay calm, hoping I would be ready when a chance to get away came up. I couldn't check my watch, so I had to guess how long I had been in the trunk. It seemed like the ride took about 15 minutes. Slim opened the trunk. He grabbed my shirt collar and tried to pull me out. He soon saw that I couldn't help with my legs stuck together, so Slim took out a small knife from his pocket and used it to cut the tape that held my legs. I placed my left foot on the ground and started to lift my right leg out of the trunk when Porky showed up in my Mustang. "Did anyone see us leave the parking lot?" Porky asked as he stepped out of the car. "Didn't seem like it," Slim replied. Porky came over and grabbed a handful of my hair, pulling my face close to his. When he talked to me, his breath was so bad that I almost felt sick. "You know what's really funny, you jerk?" Porky said. "Everyone is going to think you shot that cop." I heard Slim laugh, but I didn't find anything funny about it. A quick glance around showed me exactly where I was. We were at the old Union Pacific train yard. The main track running through the yard still saw some trains, but the side tracks were no longer in use. If I walked about 1.5 miles along the train tracks, they would cross 5th Street Road. From there, the tracks would be only 200 yards from the back of my house. "All right, let's go," Porky said as he nudged me toward the train tracks. I watched Slim take a shovel from the back of the Camry. Then he walked with us across the train tracks. After we crossed the main line and 3 smaller tracks that were not used anymore, we started climbing Parker's Hill. I wasn't sure why it was called that, but I knew this place very well. It had been 15 years since I stood at the top of Parker's Hill. Back in high school, my friends and I would camp there. On top of the hill, there was a wide space where we planned to build our campfire and set up our sleeping bags. This place was perfect because there were no houses nearby, and no one could see our campsite from the train yard below. The other side of Parker's Hill, away from the train yard, was filled with thick trees. They grew so close together that it was nearly impossible to walk through the 10 acres of woods without finding one of the 3 paths that had been cleared. Luckily, I knew the trails well and where they might take us. As we climbed the hill, I took a good look at my captors, trying to find any flaws. Porky was not dressed right for the weather. He wore tight jeans that didn't suit his round figure. His long-sleeved blue shirt had the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. It was already marked with sweat, and Porky seemed very uncomfortable. Slim, on the other hand, wore knee-length lime green shorts with a matching polo shirt. He had on penny loafers without socks. He dressed well for the weather, but with his skinny legs sticking out of those bright green shorts, he looked like a big green popsicle. By the time we got to the open area on top of Parker's Hill, Porky's shirt and the top of his jeans were soaked with sweat. The open area looked a little different since the last time I visited Parker's Hill. Small trees were growing where we used to have our campfire, but I still knew the spot. Porky stood right behind me with his gun aimed at my head. Slim walked to the back of the hill and stopped about 50 feet from the trees where he began to dig a hole. He worked at this for a few minutes and then paused. "I think Blanchard can handle his own problems," Slim said. "Fine," Porky replied softly. Slim came over and grabbed my arm, guiding me back to the spot where he had been digging. He cut the tape off my hands and handed me the shovel. "Start digging now." I stayed still. At first, I was sure I wouldn't be digging my own grave, but after thinking more and getting a little push from Slim, who tapped my head with his gun, I began to change my mind. I realized that holding the shovel could actually help me. It could be used as a tool, or maybe even a way to defend myself. So I started to dig. While doing that, I kept an eye out for my chance to escape, As soon as I began to dig, Porky put his gun in his belt and walked to a tree. He sat down underneath it. The big guy then took a candy bar from his shirt pocket and opened it. With Porky on the ground, I only had to deal with Slim. But Slim was not making it easy. Every time I tried to get closer, Slim moved away just enough so that I couldn't reach him with my shovel. My chances of making it out were slim. I knew I had to find a way to handle Slim before Porky got up and moved, and time was not on my side. Feeling desperate, I thought of a plan. I decided to throw a handful of dirt in Slim's face and then rush at him, swinging the shovel and yelling. I hoped to surprise him so I could reach him before he could use his weapon. I scooped up some dirt and was ready to start my plan when I noticed them. It's funny how things turn out sometimes. My help didn't come from my clever plan, which I thought was perfect, but instead from a little surprise. Slim was standing at the end of the hole I was digging, watching me work. I was thinking about how far I would need to throw the shovel full of dirt when I noticed that Slim had put his right foot on a soft pile of dirt. What I saw, and Slim didn't, was about 1,000 fire ants crawling on his shoe and up his bare leg. The strange thing about fire ants is how they work together. I knew for sure that in just a few seconds Slim would feel a lot of pain. I just waited. What the heck? Oh my gosh! Slim yelled. When Slim bent down to try to knock the ants off his leg, I rushed over and swung the shovel like a baseball bat. I grabbed Slim's gun hand, and he yelled out loud as his gun flew far away, at least 60 feet. Slim was crying out in pain as I dashed out of the hole and took off toward the woods. I glanced back to see what Porky was up to. He was struggling to get up and pull out his gun at the same time, and he was having a hard time with both. I had just gotten to the woods and slowed down to move through the thick trees when I heard the first bullet hit the branches above me. The next 2 shots missed even more. After I walked about 20 feet into the woods, I turned around to see if anyone was coming after me. I could see Porky walking back and forth at the edge of the woods. He was too big to get through the thick trees. I could hear him shouting at Slim, telling him to chase me into the woods. Slim kept jumping and swearing as he tried to brush away the ants that were biting his leg. With no one chasing me, I was able to move quietly through the trees towards my goal. After 10 minutes, I finally found the path I wanted. It led south, away from Parker's Hill. It seemed like no one had walked the trail in a while. It was covered with weeds and small branches from the trees. The path was narrow and full of twists and turns as it made its way through the forest, but it helped me get away quickly from those chasing me. I looked at my watch and saw it was 8:15. The sun was setting and the woods were becoming quite dark. I paused for a moment, listening carefully to see if anyone was following me. Except for the occasional chirp of a bird, it was very quiet. I felt afraid. I hadn't eaten in a few hours and I was feeling weak, but I knew I needed to keep going. I wanted to leave the woods before it got too dark to see. I looked at my watch again. It was 8:30. I had finally reached the spot where the path came out of the woods. I decided to wait there until the sun went down completely. It was 9:20 when I thought it was dark enough to leave the shelter of the woods. I moved another 20 steps along the path until I reached a dirt road that belonged to the old Cheswick farm. This road was not open to the public and had not been used in a long time. It was more like a wide trail that tractors and trucks had driven on, rather than a proper road. I understood that if I took the path to my left, it would go under the railroad tracks and end at a gate near Rayburn Road. Rayburn Road was a dirt road. If I went down the farm path to my right, I would walk beside a few old fields, pass a barn, and then reach the Cheswick house. I chose the right path and began to walk. I recalled that the Cheswick house had been empty for a few years. There was a "for sale or rent" sign in the yard. I hoped the house was still empty so I could hide there until morning. When morning came, I would walk to a neighbor's house and ask them to call the police for me. While I stumbled along the old farm road in the dark, I began to think about what I would say to the police. A short, chubby guy I call Porky, and a tall, skinny guy who looked like a green popsicle I call Slim, cornered me in the parking lot of Riverside Diner. Porky shot Detective Olson and made it seem like I was the one who did it. Then, Slim pushed me into the trunk of his car. They took me up Parker's Hill where I had to start digging my own grave. But then Slim was suddenly attacked by swarms of fire ants, and I managed to escape. Since I was the main suspect in the shootings of my wife and Detective Olson, The police were not likely to trust my story. To be honest, I wasn't even sure I believed my own story, even though I knew it was real. I tried to understand what was going on, but it made no sense. Why would Porky and Slim want to hurt me? Did they also shoot Holly? I drove down the road, passing 2 empty fields and an old barn, until I reached the backyard of the Cheswick house. I didn't see any lights shining from the back of the house, so I decided to go to the front. The porch light was on, but there were no lights inside. It seemed like someone was home, so I needed to adjust my plans. I took a risk and rang the doorbell. I waited for a while, but when no one answered, I walked back to the road. I looked both ways down County Route 15, which goes past the house, but all I saw was darkness. This area was all about farming, and the houses were spread out. I knew the closest house was to my left on CR 15. It was nearly half a mile away, over a hill. I stood at the end of the driveway, looking to my left. I was almost decided to walk to that house to ask for help when I noticed lights from a car shining over the hill. Worried that the two might be searching for me, I quickly turned and ran to the back of the house. I ducked around the corner and peeked out to see the road. What I saw made my heart race. 2 cars were on the road, my Mustang and the Camry, and both had slowed down and were turning into the driveway. Could they have spotted me? I didn't think so, but I wasn't taking any chances. I moved farther back behind the house, looking for a good place to hide. There were only 3 steps by the back door and a big propane tank in the back of the house. There was no other place to hide. I crouched down behind the propane tank and lay on the ground. I watched as 2 cars went by the house and parked near the barn. I felt cold sweat on my forehead when I saw Slim get out of the Camry and open the barn doors for Porky, who was getting ready to drive my Mustang inside. I was in trouble again. The steps to the back door were behind me, so there was no way to hide when they came up to the house. I tried to get closer to the house while watching Slim. I reached my left arm out to touch the wall and found a small space for a cellar window right beside me. I peeked in to see if the window could hide me, but it was only a couple of feet deep and about 3 feet long. I noticed that instead of a window, there was a small door at the top. This door was attached with hinges and opened inward. While Porky and Slim closed the barn doors, I pushed against the small door as hard as I could. Luckily, it wasn't locked from the inside. It shook a bit, then, with a squeak, it swung open. I couldn't see anything beyond the open door. I felt scared about what might be lurking in the dark beyond the door, but I was even more afraid of what would happen if Porky and Slim caught me. I quickly turned around to keep an eye on them as I began to move into the dark space. I went in feet first and used just my arms to help me since there was nothing to support me below. It took me a long 30 seconds to squeeze through the space and land on the cellar floor. At first I couldn't see anything, but I could hear 2 men coming toward the house. I realized they had not spotted me when I listened to their talk as they walked up the steps and went inside through the back door. "I really don't want to deal with Big Tony when he arrives," Porky said. "He's really mad and it's because of you." "How is this my blame? You're the one who let him get away." "I couldn't help it. Those ants were biting me like crazy. Look at my leg. It's all swollen and it hurts a lot," Slim said. "Then he hit me with the shovel and I think my hand is broken. And what were you doing? Just sitting under that tree and eating? You should have been paying attention too." I could hear them moving around the house and talking, but I couldn't catch everything they said. From what I did hear, this man named Big Tony was coming over with 3 other guys that Porky called Bagger, Meatball, and Guy. After a few minutes, my eyes got used to the dim light in the cellar. It was still pretty dark, but I could see that I was in a small room. When I looked closely, I noticed that it wasn't really a room. The walls were short and only about 4 feet high. As I walked along the wall, I stepped on something hard. It felt like a rock, so I picked it up. I thought I could use it as a tool if I needed to. I couldn't see it clearly, but it looked like a chunk of coal. That seemed to fit. The small room I was in used to be a place for storing coal when the house had a coal furnace. There were just a few pieces of coal scattered around because the owner changed to a propane gas furnace earlier. The tiny door I crawled through was likely used to bring in new coal. I carefully moved along the short wall until I found a space wide enough for me to step through. Even though my eyes were still getting used to the low light in the cellar, I could see a staircase leading up to the first floor. At the top of the stairs, I noticed some light shining from under a door. I slowly walked to the bottom of the staircase, being careful not to hit anything that would let the two weak lights above know I was down there. I could hear their voices more clearly now, even though I had no idea what they were saying. I almost understood that Porky was telling Slim about a new all-you-can-eat place he had visited when I heard a phone ring. "It's Pug," Porky said. "Yeah, we're both here. Okay? See you soon." "What's going on?" Slim asked. "Big Tony and Bagger will be here in a bit. Guy and Sammy are hanging out near the police station. Why are they standing over there? In case that big guy tries to turn himself in." "Are they really going to shoot him right in front of the police station?" Slim asked. "How should I know? Big Tony didn't say anything, and I didn't ask." "Did you tell Big Tony I hurt my hand and need something for my leg?" Slim said. "Did you hear me tell him that?" "No, that's why I asked you." "No, I didn't tell him. You can tell him yourself when he comes here." "Is he still mad at us?" "What do you think?" "Yeah, I guess he is." Other than Slim's complaints about his hurt hand and the sting in his leg from the fire ants, my two friends did not say much else. I could feel they were both anxious about Big Tony coming to the house. I didn't really know who Big Tony was, but I almost laughed when I imagined Porky and Slim trying to explain how I managed to escape them. Maybe Big Tony would take care of both of them and solve two of my problems. It got quiet upstairs, which gave me a moment to think. I was hiding in the basement of the house where my would-be attackers were staying. I wanted to leave, but if I tried to climb out through the coal chute, the two guys upstairs might hear me. Plus, it had become so dark that I couldn't see my way back to the coal bin or the door to the chute anymore. The musty smell in the wet cellar was making it hard for me to breathe. I heard a sound in the far corner and guessed it was either a rat or a big mouse. I was not feeling very comfortable. The only good thing was that I might hear something that would tell me why these people shot Holly and why they wanted to hurt me. I moved slowly until I was right under the landing at the top of the stairs. Once we got there, I sat down on the floor and leaned against the wall. I waited with Slim and Porky for Big Tony to show up. "Here comes the car," Porky said. "Is that Big Tony?" I asked. "Yeah, I think so," he replied. "When he arrives, don't try to blame everything on me." "Why not?" Porky asked. "Because it's not all my fault. If those pesky ants hadn't been around, he wouldn't have gotten away. You weren't any help just sitting there eating a candy bar." A few minutes later, I heard a door open. Then a loud voice with a strong East Coast accent said, "Hey, Bagger, look what we have here. It's Pug and Bean, the silly duo." "We're not twins, boss," Slim said. "Come on, we don't even look similar." From what they were saying, I figured Bean was Slim and Pug was Porky. Good grief, I gave you two a simple task. Just go to the house, take care of both of them, and make it look like a murder-suicide. Which one of you wants to explain how you messed it up? "It wasn't our fault, boss," Porky said. "We got to the house at 5:30, just like you told us. She was home alone. She said Blanchard should be back by 5:45, but he still wasn't there at 10 after 6. Then Bean thought he heard a car outside, and when I turned to check, she ran for the back door. I had to shoot her before she could leave the house." "Why didn't you just deal with him when he came inside like you were supposed to?" "The car Bean heard wasn't his, and we worried someone might have heard the gunshots, so we left," Slim replied. Hearing them discuss shooting Holly and their plan to hurt me as if it was just a mistake in a game was really disturbing. A chill ran down my spine, and a wave of anger surged through me. For a brief moment, I thought about running upstairs and confronting them. Thankfully, I managed to calm myself before doing anything rash. After all, the only thing I had for protection was a piece of coal still in my hand. What happened at the diner? All you needed to do was put him in the trunk of your car, shoot him, and then bury him somewhere nobody would find him for a long time. But instead, you shot a police officer. I think it was Big Tony who was talking. "The officer appeared before we could get Blanchard in the trunk," Porky replied. "I shot the officer so it would look like Blanchard did it." "And you messed that up too," Big Tony said. "The officer was wearing a bulletproof vest. You were able to knock him down, but you didn't hurt him badly. Fortunately for you and your friend, the hit made him lose consciousness. So the police believe Blanchard shot him. But if Blanchard ever gets a chance to say what really happened, you two are in big trouble. I hope you both get this. I will make sure you pay the price before I let your mistakes bring me down." Big Tony was a tough guy with no mercy. It was clear this man was some sort of gangster. What I couldn't figure out was why he would want to hurt me and why they had to shoot Holly. "So after you shot the cop, why didn't you get Blanchard then?" I asked. "We wanted to leave before anyone came out of the diner and noticed what was happening," Porky explained. "All right, I can understand that. But how did he get away from you? All you needed to do was take him out to the country, open the trunk, and do what needed to be done. Then you could hide him away. How did you let him escape?" Big Tony asked, clearly upset. "We had the right spot to hide him, but it was at the top of a big hill. We didn't want to carry him up, so we made him walk there," Porky explained. "All right, so he walked up the hill and then got away?" "No," Porky replied. "Bean didn't want to dig the hole, so he handed the shovel to Blanchard and told him to dig his own grave. And you thought this was smart? No one would try to escape if they knew they were digging their own grave. You two are really out of your minds," Big Tony said. "It was the ants," Slim said. "The ants? What are you talking about?" Big Tong yelled. "I was watching him and making sure to stay far enough away so he couldn't hit me with the shovel when the ants attacked me," Slim explained. "Attacked by ants? Whose ants are you talking about, and how did they get here? Do we have to deal with his ants now?" Big Tony shouted. "Not his ants, boss. Red ants. I stepped on an anthill and thousands of them came after me. Look at my leg." "It still hurts a lot," he complained. "He got away because you stepped on an anthill?" Big Tony asked. "What were you doing while this guy was bothering the ants?" "Well, He started to explain. "He was sitting under a tree eating a candy bar," Slim said. "Good grief. The two of you together don't seem to have any common sense," Big Tony sighed. "Sorry, boss," Porky said. "We tried to do it the right way, but things went wrong." Slim nodded in agreement. "If Blanchard decides to confess, are you planning to have Meatball and Guy take care of him at the police station?" "Is that what you would do, Bean?" came a new voice with a British accent. "I'm not sure, Bagger. I just follow what you all tell me," Slim replied. "You do? It doesn't sound like it to me," Bagger said. "A few months ago, Meatball was here, and he found some local police officers who were happy to help us for a little money," Bagger said. "What did he tell you?" Slim asked. "We have 2 police officers from Riverton on our side," Big Tony explained. "They will let us know if Blanchard tries to come in and confess. They get good money and will help us make sure Blanchard doesn't live long enough to talk." "How are we going to do that?" Slim asked. "Blanchard already tried to shoot a cop, didn't he?" Big Tony said. "No, that was me." "But the cops think it was him, right?" "Oh, yeah. The good news is that the police see Blanchard as a threat and someone who might be armed. If our 2 guys do their job right, Blanchard will be found dead with a gun in his hand before he makes it to the police station," Big Tony said. "Meatball has a police scanner and will tell us if the cops find Blanchard, but I'd rather we find him first and take care of things like we planned. If they don't find him, they will think he killed his wife and ran away after shooting that detective." "But she's not dead," Slim replied. "She will be. We have people watching the hospital, too. If she starts to wake up from her coma, she will get the care she needs." The thought that Holly was not safe in the hospital struck me deeply. I needed to find a way to keep her safe, but how could I do that? On one side, there were the police. They believed I had harmed my wife, and Detective Olson was leading the charge. They saw me as a threat and would be ready to take action against me. On the other side, there was Big Tony and his crew, which I counted to be 6 men. 4 people were sitting upstairs, while 2 others were outside watching the police station. On top of that, 2 police officers from Riverton were being paid by Big Tony. They would not hesitate to harm me if they had the chance. "What happened to the jerk's car?" Big Tony asked. "It's in the barn," Porky replied. "Keep it locked up in the barn for now. We need to figure out how to get it out of town. Maybe we can rent a car trailer from U-Haul and tow it down to Stry. Leave Lewis's car on the street with the keys inside," Big Tony instructed. "What do you want us to do now, boss?" Porky asked. "Can I go to the hospital? I think my hand is hurt and my leg feels really bad," Slim said. "Pug, you take Bean to that urgent care we saw on our way into town. I don't want you 2 anywhere near the hospital. When you're finished, I want both of you to go sit by Blanchard's house." "Won't there be a lot of police around?" Porky asked. "They should have left by now. Just park close to the house and keep an eye out in case Blanchard returns," Big Tony replied. Why would he go back to the house? Slim wondered. Aren't the police watching it? Where else can he go? Big Tony answered. How long do we need to wait there? Porky asked. Stay until I call you and tell you to leave. Can you do that? Sure, boss. Bagger and I will keep an eye on the hospital in case Blanchard wants to sneak in and see his wife. All right, let's go. I don't want that guy to escape while we just sit here doing nothing. I could hear them moving around above us. Then the light went out and I heard a door open and shut. After that, there was silence. When I heard the door close upstairs, I quietly walked up to the top of the stairs and pressed my ear to the door. Not hearing anything, I turned the handle and the door opened into the kitchen. I hurriedly looked around the house, but I didn't find anything useful. I went out the back door and rushed to the barn, hoping my car would be unlocked and the keys would be inside. Sadly, I had no luck. The car was locked and the keys were missing. I sat down on the barn floor and thought about what to do next. I could still go to a neighbor's house and ask them to help me call the police. I chose not to do that because I was worried that the police coming for me might be working for Big Tony. I couldn't go home because Slim and Porky would be there, waiting for me. I felt tired and hungry, and it was hard to think clearly. I really needed something to eat, and I wanted to be safe while doing it. The best choice would be to leave town, but I didn't have a way to get out. Then a thought started to come to me. I wasn't sure if my plan was a good idea, but it made me feel better to have something to do. It was better to act than to sit still. At 9:30 p.m., I left the barn and walked down the old farm road, going back the way I had come. I walked past the spot where I had entered the woods earlier in the evening. A little further, I walked under the Union Pacific Railroad tracks. At the end of the farm path, I climbed over the old gate and stepped onto Rayburn Road, turning to the right. After walking about half a mile, Rayburn Road met Commerce Road, and I turned left onto Commerce. This road had some local building and trucking businesses. Both sides were filled with big garages and storage buildings. There were no people out at that hour, but security lights and cameras were watching, so I needed to stay alert. 2 blocks down from where I was on Commerce Road, I turned onto Industrial Drive. That was my destination. I moved carefully to the intersection, sticking to the shadows and listening for any cars. There was a big oak tree on the northwest corner. I hid behind it and checked both directions on Industrial Drive. I was glad I did because as I peeked out, I spotted a police car from Riverton driving toward me on Industrial Drive. My heart raced as I hoped I hadn't been noticed when I glanced out from behind the tree. I pressed myself against the trunk and waited, holding my breath, until the police car was gone. When I thought it was clear, I dashed across Industrial Drive and hid behind a U-Haul truck in the Riverton Secure Self-Storage lot. From my spot, I watched for any signs of movement on either Industrial Drive or Commerce Road. Noticing no one around, I focused on the security gate of the Riverton Secure Self-Storage place, which was just 20 steps away. I wasn't worried about the camera above the gate. People who rent storage units can come and go at any time. As long as I kept my face hidden from the camera, I thought I would be fine getting through the gate. I looked around again to make sure the patrol car wasn't returning. Then, I quickly went to the gate and entered the access code. Riverton Secure Self-Storage has 10 lines of storage units in different sizes. Thankfully, my brother's unit was in the second row, facing away from the street and hidden from passing cars. I took off the lock from Jack's unit and lifted the door just enough to slip underneath. I shut the door again and turned on the single light bulb that hung from the ceiling. It was the only light in the small storage unit. I carefully walked around the piles of boxes and old furniture towards the back of the unit. There, against the wall, I spotted Jack's leather sofa, hidden under a worn bedsheet. Tired from my long day, I sank into the sofa and closed my eyes. I hoped to catch a few moments of rest before I had to face the next task ahead. I couldn't fall asleep. I kept thinking and worrying about what would happen next. Would I end up dead, buried in a shallow grave on Parker's Hill? Who would take care of Holly if something happened to me? Or could I somehow find a way to save us both? With Big Tony, his men, and the police all searching for me, things didn't look good. Suddenly, I felt my body shaking. The more I thought about everything, the worse the shaking became. I started to shake so much that my body began to hurt. It took me a while to calm down and slow my racing heart. I understood that if I didn't do something soon, I might really lose it. I pushed myself to stand up from the couch and get things moving. I opened my brother's closet and went through his clothes. I found everything I needed. Jack and I are about the same size, so his clothes fit me well. I took off my sweaty clothes and put on some jeans and a blue t-shirt. I wanted to take a shower first, but I couldn't. I found one of Jack's backpacks and filled it with another set of clothes. Then, from a little drawer in the closet, I grabbed Jack's motorcycle papers, his Missouri driver's license, and the keys to the bike. I put them all in my pocket. Next, I put on Jack's riding jacket, boots, and helmet. Then I slipped my arms through the straps of the backpack. I knew the helmet would cover my face, and I thought that no one would guess it was me on the motorcycle. This made me feel a bit safer as I stepped back out onto the street. I walked to the front of the storage unit and turned off the light. Then, I lifted the door just enough to take a quick look outside. Seeing that there was no one in the narrow street outside, I opened the door wider and carefully rolled Jack's Honda motorcycle into the alley. After that, I made sure to lock the storage unit. I hadn't ridden the bike in a few weeks, but it started right up without any problem. The gas tank was almost empty, so my first stop was the gas station at the corner of Industrial Drive and Iowa Street. I kept my helmet on, paid with cash, and stayed low-key, not wanting to attract any attention to myself. Now it was time to shake off the police and Big Tony. I figured that sooner or later the police and Big Tony would try to follow me by checking my ATM or credit card use. If they did, I wanted it to look like I was going far from Riverton. After I left the gas station, I drove west on Industrial and then took Route 61 south. I drove about 50 miles to Hannibal, Missouri. In Hannibal, I found an ATM and took out $400 from my savings account. I rode over to the Golden Corral buffet. I parked my bike behind the restaurant where no one could see it. I took off my leather jacket and locked it in my saddlebags along with my helmet. I wanted to keep my motorcycle a secret while I was inside. I paid for my meal with my credit card. After I finished eating, I walked across the street to the Econo Lodge Motel. I checked in using my own name and paid for one night with my credit card. I went into the room and turned on the TV. I made the bed look messy, like someone had been sleeping in it. Then I left the room key on the bedside table. I got on my bike and rode north on Route 61. I stopped at the TikTok Motel close to Taylor, Missouri. There, I signed in using my brother's name and showed Jack's Missouri driver's license as ID. I paid for the room in cash. Once I got to my room, I lay down on the bed to think about what to do next, but I fell asleep before I could figure anything out. I woke up the next morning just before 11 o'clock. After a long shower, I remembered what the motel clerk suggested. I went back down to Route 6 to the 18-wheeler restaurant to grab some food. The meal was tasty, and there was a lot of it. While I was eating, I finally felt relaxed for the first time since everything began. This gave me a chance to think about what to do. I could go to the police, but I wasn't sure who in the Riverton police I could trust. I even thought about going to the Missouri State Police, but if they didn't believe me, they would just send me back to the Riverton police. The main reason I chose not to go to the police was that I had to protect Holly. I couldn't do that if I was in jail or dead. I realized that my only chance to clear my name and save Holly was to link Big Tony and his gang to Holly's shooting and the attack on Detective Olson. This idea popped into my mind while I remembered what I had heard the night before at the farmhouse. The answer to my problem was the Sony ICD voice recorder I bought for work a few months ago. If I could have recorded Big Tony and his crew talking about what they had done or what they were planning, I would have had all the proof I needed. The recorder was small enough to fit in my pocket. It was strong enough that when I placed it on the table in my conference room, I could capture everything said during our staff meetings. The tape recorder could record for 280 hours, which was perfect for my plans. The issue was that the recorder was in my briefcase, and that briefcase was at home. I worried that Porky and Slim might still be watching my house, and there was a chance the police could be watching too. I hoped that the police had noticed my banking and credit card use in Hannibal and would think I had left town. If they thought I was gone, they might stop paying attention to my house. I was quite sure that if the police believed I had left town, Big Tony would hear about it from his contacts in the police department. I waited in Taylor until around 3 o'clock in the afternoon before heading back to Riverton. I took it slow on the way back and got to Riverton a little after 4 o'clock. When I arrived in town, I turned west onto 5th Street Road and drove straight until I reached the train tracks. I drove slowly next to the train tracks until I was right behind my house. I was getting ready to do something I had done a lot back in high school. I used to sneak out at night to hang out with my friends, and then I would have to sneak back in when I got home. I always worried that my dad would be waiting for me, but I had never felt as scared as I did right then. Between the train tracks and my house, there was a big field full of tall weeds and thick bushes. Just like in high school, I planned to crawl through the field and sneak into my house. I believed I could reach the house without being noticed, but I wasn't sure what I would find waiting for me inside. I rode my bike off the tracks and into the field for about 20 steps, then laid it down. The house was still over 100 yards away, but I found a spot behind some bushes and kept an eye on it. After 20 minutes of seeing nothing happening, I decided to move forward through the tall grass and weeds. I stopped now and then to check if anyone was watching me. When I got to the edge of the field, about 25 yards from the house, I crouched down behind a big forsythia bush and thought about what to do next. From my hiding spot, I could see the police tape on the back door that leads to the kitchen. Right inside that door, Holly had been lying in a pool of her own blood. I wasn't going to break the police tape to go in there. I also couldn't risk being seen if I went around to the front of the house and tried to use the front door. I had no choice but to go in through the basement. In my neighborhood, most houses were built in the mid-50s and stood on flat concrete. But my house was different. It was the only one with a basement. The man who built it was really scared of two things: a nuclear war and tornadoes. Because of this, he created a basement that could serve as both a safe place from storms and a shelter from disasters. When my dad got the house, he changed the basement into a fun room with a TV and a pool table. There are just two ways to get in and out of the basement. One way is through a door tucked in the kitchen pantry. This door leads to a set of stairs that go down to a strong metal door that opens into the basement. The other way is from outside on the north side of the house. Here, you have to lift a storm door to reach the stairs that lead down to another entrance. The basement is fully underground. The only thing visible from outside is the door for the stairs leading to the side entrance. After checking one last time, I dashed the last 25 yards to the house. I found the keys to the storm door and the basement door hidden behind the left shutter of the living room window. I took off the padlock, lifted the heavy steel storm door, and lowered it behind me as I went down the stairs. With the storm door shut, I was in total darkness. I had to carefully feel my way down the last 3 steps and over to the basement door. There was no light in the stairway to help me find the door lock, so it took me a few minutes to put the key in and unlock the door. Still in total darkness, I moved slowly into the room until I bumped into the pool table. As I pictured the room in my mind, I used the side of the pool table to guide me. I walked around the table until I was about across from where I began. I stepped away from the table, shuffling my feet and reaching out with my hands to check for anything in my way until I felt the wall. Then, I moved along the wall to my right, using my hands to find the light switch. I turned the lights on and also turned on the intercom. With the lights on, I felt a bit calmer for a moment. I plopped down on the couch in front of the TV and took some deep breaths. I felt safe in this room. If anyone was upstairs, they wouldn't have heard me moving in the basement. With the intercom on, I could hear if someone was upstairs. I sat quietly for the next 10 minutes, listening for any sounds from the intercom that meant someone was above me. When I realized that the quiet on the main floor felt just as loud as the quiet in the basement, I decided to go upstairs. I paused in the pantry for a moment before going into the kitchen. I could smell something metallic and saw a dark stain on the floor. It was Holly's blood, and it made me feel uneasy. I worried I might be sick right there. I turned my head away from the disturbing sight and covered my mouth and nose with my hand. I held my breath and hurried to my left, turning around the corner and stepping into the living room. I wanted to sit down and give my stomach a moment to calm, but I pushed myself to keep going. I walked to my study, which is located at the front of the house, just inside the door. I carefully looked through the curtains and felt relieved to see there were no cars within 200 yards of my home. When I turned away from the window, I noticed that my briefcase was missing from its usual spot. Every day after work, I would place my briefcase on the right side of my desk. But today, it wasn't there. A cold wave of fear washed over me as I started to worry. Where could my briefcase be? Did the police take it? My mind raced, and I struggled to focus. I sat down at my desk, took a few deep breaths, and tried to relax. I thought about everything that happened on Tuesday, from when I left work to when I found Holly on the kitchen floor. Then I remembered something important. I never took my briefcase into the study. I had left it and the bag from J.C. Penney on the sofa in the living room before going into the kitchen to find Holly. I jumped up from my chair and rushed to the living room, but my briefcase wasn't there. The bag from Penny's was gone too. The fear I felt a little while ago came rushing back. I was certain the police had the briefcase. I began to walk around the house aimlessly when I spotted it. My briefcase was open on the dining room table. I felt nervous to look inside because I wasn't sure I could handle it if my recorder was missing. Thankfully, it was there. In the next 30 minutes, I made myself a cheese sandwich and grabbed a bottle of Diet Pepsi from the fridge. I ate my meal in my study. I kept an eye out the window for police cars or any cars that looked out of place. Once I was done eating, I put a new battery in my recorder. Then I quietly slid it into my pocket. I took a small flashlight from my desk drawer before going back to the basement. I left the house just like I found it and locked the doors behind me. I got my bike and rode along the tracks to 5th Street Road, then towards town. I turned onto Industrial Drive and then onto Commerce Road, finally ending up on Rayburn Road. As I reached the fence gate where I had left the Cheswick property the night before, I paused and carefully pushed my bike through the slightly open gate. I parked the bike behind some bushes so it wouldn't be visible to any cars passing by on Rayburn Road. After that, I tucked my helmet and riding jacket away with the bike and began to walk toward the Cheswick house. Once I saw the house, I noticed there were no cars in the driveway. I stepped off the dirt road so that the barn was in between me and the house. When I reached the barn, I looked in through the window and saw my Mustang inside. It was the only car there, so I felt pretty sure that no one was in the house. I tried to stay hidden as I moved closer to the house. When I got to the back, I hid behind the propane tank for a moment to listen for any noise that might mean someone was home. Hearing no sounds, I walked to the old coal chute door and carefully climbed down into the cellar, just like I had done the night before. I listened again for any noise in the house, but all I could hear was my own breathing. With my flashlight, I quickly found my way out of the coal bin and up the cellar stairs. In less than a minute, I stopped again at the kitchen door to listen to the quiet house. Since I heard nothing, I slowly opened the kitchen door and looked inside. The room was empty. The room wasn't completely empty. It had no people in it, but the sink was filled with dirty dishes. The table was covered with empty beer bottles and overflowing ashtrays. When I stepped into the kitchen, I began to search for a good spot to hide my recorder. I needed to make sure I could catch all their talks. I found just the right place above the kitchen window. The window had blinds and curtains that would help keep my recorder out of sight. I climbed up on a chair to put the recorder on the Venetian blinds. I tucked it behind the ruffled part of the curtains to keep it out of sight. Once the recorder was set up and turned on, I walked around the room, chatting away. After that, I listened to the recording. It was great. The recorder caught every sound. I erased the old recording and then changed the settings to voice activation. Finally, I placed the recorder back on top of the blinds. After looking again to make sure no one could see me, I walked to the back door. Everything was going according to my plan, but I still didn't know how I would get the recorder back. I decided to wait behind the barn and keep an eye on the house until Big Tony and his crew arrived. Then, I would look for a chance to sneak back into the house and grab the recorder. If things went really wrong, I would call Detective Olson. I would try to persuade him over the phone to go to the farmhouse and ask Big Tony and his guys some questions. I thought I could trust Olson because if he was working for Big Tony, we would have heard something after Porky shot him. Even though my plan wasn't very strong, it never had a chance to work. Just as I was about to open the back door, I saw a black Lincoln Town car drive down the driveway. It was followed by a red Camry and a white Ford Taurus. I hurried through the kitchen to the door that leads to the cellar. I think I only felt 2 steps as I went down the stairs quickly. Once again, I found my spot under the stairs in the cellar so I could listen to what was happening above me. In the quiet before they came inside, I could hear my heart thumping in my chest. Soon after, I heard a group of people entering the house, but nobody was speaking. It wasn't until I heard the door shut that someone finally said something. "What do we do now, boss?" A voice I didn't recognize from my last visit to the cellar spoke up. "The police don't know where he is, so how are we going to find him?" "We wait right here. Maybe those clueless cops will track him down. But one thing is for sure, she's not making it through the night. Tomorrow, Bean and Pug, you will take Blanchard's car to St. Louis and get rid of it somewhere." "How are you going to do that without them coming after us?" It sounded like Porky. "We have a plan. There's a nurse who works night shifts at the hospital. He'll visit her around 3 in the morning and give her a shot. No one will see him because she is already unconscious. She'll be gone by morning, and it will look like her injuries caused it." Panic washed over me again. Suddenly I realized I had to call Olson before they could hurt Holly. But there was no way I could leave the house in the daytime with all of them upstairs. I'd have to wait until it was dark to do anything. So I just sat and listened, hoping my recorder was catching everything they said. What if they do a body check on her? I think it was Slim who said that. Will they find out about the insulin? "Maybe, but we'll be gone by the time they do," Digger replied. "Our friend at the hospital will slip Blanchard's cell phone under her bed. It will seem like Blanchard came to see her. If they find the insulin in her system, the police will think Blanchard visited the hospital to complete what he started." "Oh, I see. That sounds good," Porky said. "I'm really glad you agree, since it's because of you that we're still here." "If you and Bean hadn't messed things up at the start, we'd be home by now," Big Tony said. "Bean?" "Yes, boss." "I need you to go into town and get some Chinese food," Big Tony instructed. "Can't we just order it for delivery?" "What are you, out of your mind? No one knows we're here, and I want to keep it that way." Once Slim left to get their food, the talk shifted to topics that didn't matter to me, so I tried to ignore them while I thought of a way to escape. While the group talked happily upstairs, I felt it was safe to check out the cellar. I used the flashlight I had brought from home to look for an easy way to sneak out. After a quick scan, it was clear there were only 2 ways out of the cellar. I could go back upstairs through the kitchen, which seemed too risky, or I could try to climb out through the coal chute door. However, the coal chute came with its own challenges for me. The bottom of the chute was about 2 feet above my head. This meant I couldn't just open the door and climb out. The door opened inward, so even if I could get up to the ledge, I wouldn't be able to open it. I needed something to stand on to reach the chute door. I started looking around the cellar again. In the far corner on the other side of the room, I saw an old wooden crate that seemed perfect for what I needed. I carried the crate to the coal bin and placed it on the floor near the coal chute. I carefully put 1 foot on the crate and slowly shifted my weight onto it to make sure it wouldn't break when I tried to climb out of the cellar. The crate was sturdy enough to hold me, and I was able to reach the chute door. While I was standing on the crate, I noticed another issue. 2 pipes were next to the coal chute. They were hanging down about 1 foot from the floor beams. One pipe was made of shiny metal, about 1 inch wide. The other was a soft, bendable pipe that was also 1 inch wide. I guessed that the shiny metal pipe carried water, while the bendable pipe likely held electrical wires. The pipes hadn't bothered me when I went in through the coal chute, but I worried they might be in my way when I tried to leave. I needed to be careful not to hit or kick the pipes because the sound would likely be heard above me. I had my escape plan ready. Now, I just had to wait until it was dark. It was almost 6 o'clock, so I had about 3.5 hours to go before it got dark enough for me to make my move. Thursday, June 12th, 9:35 p.m. I spent more than 3 hours sitting on the cellar floor under the stairs, listening to Big Tony and the other bad people talk. Bean came back with the food, and I could smell it in the cellar. If my recorder was working right, I would have proof that I was innocent. It would also show other bad things Big Tony had done. I heard Digger telling a story. He said that he and Big Tony hurt 2 guys from another gang and put their bodies in a swamp a few miles south of the Meadowlands Sports Complex in New Jersey. If I stayed alive long enough to give the recording to the police, Big Tony and his crew would be in big trouble. I spent a lot of time in the basement trying to understand why these guys wanted to hurt Holly and me. I didn't know Big Tony or any of his friends, so why would they want to kill us? In all the talks I listened to, I never heard anything that explained why they wanted to hurt us. At 9:35 p.m., I thought it was time to act. I knew it wouldn't be as dark as I wanted, but with the house lights on, it would be dark enough outside for them not to see me running through the backyard. I had a feeling of hope. When I climbed onto the wooden crate, my heart raced so fast that I thought the people above could hear it. I attempted to calm down by taking deep breaths, but this just made me a bit dizzy, and I almost fell off the crate. Once the dizziness went away, I lifted the chute door with my left hand. I held it open just wide enough to get my head and shoulders underneath. I had to let the door fall onto my back to squeeze myself through the opening. I got halfway out of the chute when I couldn't move anymore. The door had shut against the back of my legs, and the more I tried to push forward, the more it pressed into me. It felt like being caught in a tricky hand puzzle. I started to feel scared when I thought I heard someone open the back door. I imagined Big Tony and the other guys standing over me while I was stuck halfway out of the chute. I held my breath and waited, but no one came out of the house. Then I realized that to get free, I just needed to move back a little bit. Moving back just a few inches was enough to ease the pressure on my legs. Now that the door wasn't pinching my legs anymore, I gently rolled over onto my back. While lying there, I used my left knee to lift the door so it wouldn't trap me again. But being on my back created a new issue. I couldn't find anything to grab with my hands to help pull myself out of the narrow space. I remembered the two pipes just inside the opening and began to feel around for them with my right foot. When I thought I found the water pipe, I lifted the door with my left knee. Then I pushed against the pipe as hard as I could with my right leg. As I pushed myself out of the opening, I felt the pipe come free. The door swung shut behind me, blocking my view of what was going on inside the cellar. I could hear a loud hissing sound coming from within. I figured I had caused a small break in the water pipe, and water was spraying everywhere in the cellar. But I didn't have time to think about it. I needed to escape before anyone in the house heard the noise and came to check it out. I moved as quietly as I could. I ran along the back of the house until I crossed the driveway. Then I turned and dashed toward the barn. I kept low to the ground to avoid being seen by anyone looking out the window. When I was halfway to the barn, I hid behind some bushes and looked back at the house. I sat quietly for a few minutes, watching the windows and the back door for any signs of life. No one came outside, and I didn't see anyone looking out. It seemed they hadn't noticed the loud noise when the pipe broke or the spraying water. I started to move again carefully. I stayed in the shadows and used the bushes around me to hide. I walked past the barn and traveled about 200 yards when all of a sudden the whole place got bright as day. Before I could understand the light, I was thrown into the air. I fell down into the grass about 25 feet away from where I had been. All I could hear was a loud ringing in my ears. When I lifted my head, I saw burning things falling around me, but I couldn't understand what was happening. I turned over and glanced back at the farmhouse, but it was gone. Only a bit of the foundation remained. The rest of the house looked like it was crashing down in fiery chunks from above. I stood there in shock as my mind raced to understand what had occurred. The house was entirely destroyed. The Lincoln Town Car and the Camry were both in flames, and the Ford was lying on its side. Seeing the destruction, I realized there was no way anyone inside that house could have lived through such a huge explosion. Then it hit me. I hadn't smashed a water pipe with my foot. I had damaged a gas line. The hissing noise I heard while I ran away wasn't water gushing from a broken pipe. It was propane gas leaking into the cellar. Since propane is heavier than air, it would have collected in the cellar until something caused it to explode. The propane explosion lifted the house right off its base. When I stood up, I felt dizzy and had aches all over, but thankfully I didn't seem hurt badly. My first thought was to walk back to the house, but I only took a few steps before I realized that was the last place I should go. If the police came and found me there, they would think I had set the house on fire myself. They would blame me for the deaths of everyone inside. Things got even worse. I thought my voice recorder had proof that I didn't shoot Holly or Detective Olson, but it was gone, taken away by Big Tony and his men. I'm in big trouble, I muttered to myself. I glanced back at what was left of the house, then I ran. I didn't stop until I reached my motorcycle. I put on my leather jacket, started the bike, and rode it back through the gate onto Rayburn Road. I drove carefully back to the Riverton secure self-storage place and opened my brother's storage unit. I could hear sirens far away as I shut the door behind me. Once inside, I turned on the light and took off my jacket. I looked at myself in the mirror. I didn't look good. My face was dirty, and I had a few small cuts and scrapes on my back and on my legs and arms. Before that moment, I didn't even know that I had been hit by pieces from the explosion. I needed to clean myself up before doing anything else. As much as I didn't want to, I had to go out again to buy some things. I got back on my bike and rode to a store on Dublin Street. There, I bought a pack of 12 bottles of water, a roll of paper towels, some bandages, hydrogen peroxide, a tube of antibiotic cream, and a bar of soap. When I returned to the storage unit, I washed my hands and face with soap and water. I took care of my cuts and scrapes with some peroxide. None of them were bad, and the bleeding had already stopped. I put on some antibiotic cream on all my wounds and covered the worst ones with bandages. Then, I changed into a clean pair of Jack's jeans and a long-sleeve shirt from his closet. After that, I sat down to think about what to do next. I couldn't go to the police because I didn't know who to trust. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I had to go to Detective Olson. I needed to share my story and hope he would believe me. Thursday, June 12th, 10:25. PMI wore a baseball cap pulled down low to cover my face. I walked from the storage place back to the convenience store on Dublin Street. When I got there, I asked the clerk if I could use his phone book. I found the address for David Olson and used the payphone outside to call a taxi. When the taxi let me out in front of Detective Olson's house, I could feel sweat running down my sides. I was relieved to see lights on in the house as I stepped onto the front porch. I took a big breath and slowly let it out before I pressed the doorbell. Just as I was about to ring it again, the porch light turned on, and a moment later the door opened. In front of me stood a pretty woman who looked to be in her middle years. "What do you need?" she asked in a way that wasn't very kind. "I'm sorry to interrupt you at this time, but I really need to talk to Detective Olson if he's around," I replied. "Who should I say is here to see him?" she asked. "Just let him know I'm here to discuss the Holly Blanchard case," I said. The woman, who I thought was Mrs. Olson, shut the door and went back inside the house. About a minute later, the door opened again, and I saw Detective Olson pointing his gun at me. "What are you doing at my house?" Olson asked, sounding angry. "I'm here to admit I was wrong, but I need to talk to you first before you take me to the police," I said. "Why would I listen to you?" he replied. "Because I didn't harm my wife, and I didn't hurt you either. You need to know who is really guilty." Olson aimed the gun, telling me to step inside the house. As soon as I walked in, he pressed me against the wall and looked me over. "What's happening, Dave?" I heard a woman's voice from another room. "It's just someone I need to speak with," Olson replied. "Why don't you head to bed? I have to go to the station after I chat with him." "I'm not sure I'll be going to bed tonight." Detective Olson guided me into his kitchen and asked me to sit at the table. "What's so important that you came here instead of going to the station to talk to me?" I began to tell Detective Olson my story, starting from when I got to the Riverton diner and leading up to when I got to his house. Well, I didn't share every detail just as it really happened. My story was completely true and clear until I reached what happened on Parker's Hill. That's when I started adding some extra details. While Slim was watching me dig my own grave, Porky told me that he and Slim planned to kill Holly and me and make it seem like a murder-suicide. He said their plan failed because I didn't come home when I was supposed to. He told me that their boss, a man they called Big Tony, paid 2 police officers from Riverton to make sure I wouldn't be around long enough to go to court for shooting Holly. Then Big Tony paid a male nurse at the hospital to give Holly too much insulin later tonight. I said, while I was trying to find a chance to hit Slim with the shovel, he stepped on a fire ant hill. When the ants came at him, I quickly knocked the gun from his hand with the shovel. Then I ran into the woods at the back of the hill. I stayed hidden in the woods until it got dark. After that, I went to my brother's storage unit at Riverton Secure Self-Storage. I changed my clothes and took my brother's motorcycle. I rode down to Hannibal and checked into a motel. I needed some time to think about what to do and to get some sleep. Tonight I came back to Riverton. I stayed in my brother's storage unit until late this evening. Then I called a cab from the convenience store on Dublin Street and came over here. I didn't mention that I had been at Cheswick Farm. I didn't want to be linked to the blast that wrecked the house and probably hurt everyone inside. Detective Olson paid close attention and wrote down many notes. He asked several questions to understand my story better, but he didn't show me if he believed me or not. It was close to midnight, and I thought Detective Olson was done asking me questions. Then he surprised me with something I didn't see coming. "How do you explain this?" he asked. "The gun we found hidden in your garage is the one that shot your wife, and the only fingerprints on it belong to you." I was shocked. "I don't have a gun, and I didn't shoot my wife," I replied. "I don't know where that gun came from, and I really don't understand how my fingerprints ended up on it." Detective Olson didn't say anything to that. He just mentioned he needed to call his partner. "Is your partner trustworthy?" I asked. "Definitely," he replied simply. Detective Olson pulled out his cell phone and made the call. "Hi, Sarah. I'm sorry to call so late, but I need to speak with Bob. Have him call me when he's done in the shower." "Thanks, Sarah." I had to wait through what felt like forever in silence until Detective Olson's phone rang. "Hey, Bob. Thanks for getting back to me so fast. I need you to come to the house. I'd rather not explain right now." "Okay, thanks. I'll see you in 10 minutes. After that, Detective Olson stepped into the hallway and made another call, but I couldn't hear anything he said. When Detective Olson came back to the kitchen, he said, "I will make some coffee. It looks like we have a long night ahead." I was glad he hadn't taken me to the police station. It made me think he believed what I said about the 2 officers working for Big Tony. Friday, June 13th, 12:30. It was nearly 12:30 when someone knocked on the kitchen door. Detective Olson opened the door and let in a tall, slim man who looked to be around 30. "This is Detective Robert Barron," Detective Olson said. "Bob, meet Tom Blanchard." "Would you like some coffee, Bob?" "Yes, please," Detective Barron replied. "Isn't he the one who shot you in the diner parking lot?" "He says he didn't do it, but I want you to hear his side of the story." Detective Olson turned to me. "Would you like some coffee?" I nodded. As he poured the coffee, Detective Olson told Detective Barron that I had come to his house to confess. I was worried that 2 police officers from Riverton were being paid to ensure I wouldn't survive long enough to face trial for the shooting of my wife. "Mr. Blanchard, please tell Detective Barron your story. Start from when you left work on Tuesday until you reached my house tonight." "What about Holly?" I asked. "Someone has to keep her safe tonight." "That's already been arranged," Olson replied. "Start from the start and share everything with Detective Barron." "You want me to start from when I left work on Tuesday?" "Yes. I wasn't part of this case at first, so fill me in," Detective Barron said. "Be clear about the times and places." I started telling my story again from when I left work. I was almost home when I suddenly remembered I needed to pick up Holly's order at JCPenney's. I explained what I discovered when I got home. I shared as many details as I could about what took place in the parking lot at the Riverton Diner. I was careful when I explained what happened on Parker's Hill. I wanted my story to match what I had told Detective Olson before. Detective Barron paid close attention to what I said. He often asked questions to make sure he understood me. When I finished, Detectives Barron and Olson went out into the hallway that connected the kitchen to the front of the house. "Do you really believe his story?" Detective Barron asked. Slim was a tall, skinny guy, and Porky was short and round. They both worked for a man known as Big Tony. One day, they came up with a plan to get rid of Tony and his wife. But Slim didn't really understand why Big Tony wanted them out of the way. The whole thing felt like something straight out of a bad old gangster movie. The police found the gun that shot Tony's wife in Slim's garage. It had Slim's fingerprints on it. Plus, there was someone who saw Slim try to shoot Tony. Let's just get this guy and then get some rest. I get that the story is hard to believe, but some things about this case worry me, Detective Olson said. First, there's the gun. There's no record of Blanchard ever having a gun, and the serial number on the one we found was removed. I think if he wanted to hurt his wife and bought a gun secretly, he would have made sure she was safe before calling for help. I would have thought he would have a smarter way to get rid of the gun instead of just hiding it in his garage. You think someone put the gun there? Maybe. Then how did his fingerprints end up on the gun? I'm not sure, Detective Olson replied. And then there was the bag from JCPenney's. What about that bag? We found it on the sofa by the kitchen door. It had some clothes and a receipt from the catalog section at Penny's. The receipt said it was Tuesday at 6:01 p.m. We called the store, and they confirmed that Mr. Blanchard picked up his order and paid with his MasterCard. One of our neighbors said they heard what sounded like gunshots at 6:05 p.m. So this doesn't add up. He couldn't have returned from the mall and shot his wife at 6:05. "What about him shooting at you in the diner?" Detective Barron asked. "I only saw the first shot, and it seemed odd to me. I never noticed Blanchard's hand rise above the car. The flash from the gun looked like it came from under his arm. When the bullet struck me, it knocked me down, and I hit my head on the curb as I fell. I didn't wake up until the ambulance arrived, so I missed everything else. So the shooting might have gone down like he said." "So you trust his story?" "I think he could be telling the truth." "Do you think the DA will believe it?" "No way. That determined guy wants to take down Blanchard. He plans to run for mayor next year, and a quick arrest would boost his chances." "Do you really think locking up a man for hurting his wife would help him that much?" "No, but catching a guy who hurt a police officer would—" "We need to arrest him, you know," Detective Barron said. I started to wonder if the two detectives knew I had overheard them, or if they even cared. When they returned to the kitchen, Detective Olson said, "Mr. Blanchard, we need to take you downtown," said the detective. On our way out of the house, Detective Olson paused to grab a hooded sweatshirt from the hall closet. He asked me to put it on. Once I had it on, Detective Olson handcuffed me and guided me to Detective Barron's car. When we arrived at the station, Detective Olson helped me out of the car. He then pulled the hood up over my head. As we walked across the parking lot, it was very quiet outside. It felt really calm after all I had faced in the last 2 days and what was coming at the police station. "We will go in through the squad room, so once we are inside, keep your head down. Don't look up. Even if you think someone is talking to you, just keep looking down." "Do you understand?" Detective Olson asked. "Yes," I said back. Stepping from the quiet, dark parking lot into the bright, loud squad room made my eyes hurt and my stomach feel uneasy. As Detective Olson walked me through the room, I heard someone call out, "Hey, Olson, what do you have there, a peeper or a flasher?" Then everyone laughed. "Just a kid I found selling drugs by the mall," Detective Olson answered. "I'm taking him up to ask questions." The three of us walked through the squad room and got on an elevator. When the doors opened, Detective Olson nudged me forward down a dark hallway and into a room with low light. Olson switched on the lights and closed the door behind us. The room was small, about 10 feet by 10 feet. In the middle, there was a gray table with a smooth surface. One chair was on one side, and 2 chairs were on the other side. The floor and walls of the room were a dull gray, much like the table. On one wall, there was what I thought might be a 2-way mirror. The only door, also gray, had a small window in it. Olson took the hood off my sweatshirt and led me to the side of the table where there was just one chair. He took off the handcuffs and asked me to sit down. I sat in front of the 2-way mirror on the opposite wall. The dullness of the room did nothing to ease my worry. "Detective Barron has gone to talk to the district attorney. He will come here, and you'll need to share your story again. He will decide if he wants to take action or if he wants us to look into what you've said." Detective Olson and I sat in silence for about 10 minutes until we heard a gentle knock on the door. I turned to the door but couldn't see anyone through the window. "I'll be right back," Olson said, and then he left me alone in the room. Through the window, I noticed Detective Olson, Detective Barron, and another man standing outside. I wondered if that man was the district attorney. How did he arrive so quickly? The 3 men talked for a few minutes before coming back into the room. "Mr. Blanchard, this is Special Agent Kyle Van Horn from the FBI. He wants to ask you some questions," said Detective Barron. Agent Van Horn shook hands with Detective Olson. Then he leaned across the table and offered me his hand. "It's nice to meet you, Mr. Blanchard. I just wish it was a happier time for our meeting. I'm here from the Philadelphia field office looking for Anthony Lombardo. Detective Barron asked me if you had anything to do with him. Is that true?" "I don't know anyone named that," I replied. "Maybe you know him as Big Tony." "I know that name. I've never met him, but he is the one who caused my wife to get shot and tried to take my life." "So you've never seen Big Tony?" Agent Van Horn asked. "How do you know his name?" "Porky and Slim informed me about him," I replied. "Who are Porky and Slim?" Agent Van Horn wanted to know. "They're the 2 fools who hurt my wife and tried to harm me," I explained. "Can you tell me how these men mentioned Big Tony?" I then shared the story about what took place on Parker's Hill. When I was done, Agent Van Horn opened his briefcase and took out a folder. Agent Van Horn took out some photos from a folder and laid them down on the table in front of me. "Do you know any of these people?" he asked. I quickly saw Porky and Slim and pointed them out to Van Horn. "That's Slim and this one is Porky." Van Horn looked at Slim and said, "This is Mike, Bean, Soriano, and this heavier guy is Tommy, Pug, Fazio. Do you know any of the other people?" As I looked at the photos, I almost said I didn't know anyone else, but then something made me stop. I focused on one picture for a moment. It showed a heavy-set bald man. I wasn't sure how I might know him, but he seemed familiar. "This man," I said, pointing to his photo. "I can't remember why I know him, but I do know him." As I looked at the picture, I thought the guy seemed a bit messy. Then it hit me. "Danny DeVito," I said out loud. "Danny DeVito, the actor?" Van Horn asked. "No. When I first saw this guy, he kind of looked like Danny DeVito, but he was bigger and clearly messy," I said. "Where did you meet him?" "Oh, wow, that makes sense. I see the fingerprints on the gun now," I replied. "What do you mean?" Detective Olson asked. "I work part-time setting up high-speed internet for the phone company. I go to people's houses to do the work. I set up the internet for a guy. His name is Sammy Meatball DeLucia," Van Horn said. "He lived in one of those condos on the north side of town by the river," I said. "When I got to his condo, he opened the door in just his boxers and a t-shirt. He also had on some thick glasses. I remember he was eating a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. The jelly was dripping down his hand to his wrist, and some got all over his shirt. When I sat down to set up his modem, I noticed a gun next to his computer keyboard. I felt uneasy about it being so close, so I asked him to move it. He said it wasn't loaded and then invited me to check if it was safe. He said he didn't want to handle the gun with sticky peanut butter and jelly on his hands. I didn't know how to do that, so he stood next to me and explained how to take the clip out and pull the slide back to check if the gun was empty. The clip was empty, and there was nothing in the chamber, too. I tried to give the gun back to him, but he told me to put the magazine back in and set it on the table. I bet that was the gun used to shoot Holly. That's why my fingerprints are on it." Detective Barron asked Van Horn who the other men in the pictures were. "This one is Anthony Big Tony Lombardo. He's a low-level gangster with big dreams," Van Horn replied. "He is involved in drugs, money, and illegal betting in Trenton, New Jersey. We have been trying to connect him to the murders of 2 rival gang members from last year. We found their bodies in a swamp close to the Meadowlands Sports Complex." I almost said, "I heard them talking about that earlier tonight." If I had said it, my story would have been ruined. I would need to admit I had been in the basement of the farmhouse, and I didn't want to do that. "This one is Nigel Bagger Needham," Van Horn said. "Bagger moved from England to escape some legal issues. He has lived in the U.S. for about 5 years, and he is Big Tony's top guy. This is Guy Dugan. He just joined the group and doesn't have a nickname yet," Bagger said. "How long have you been after Big Tony and his crew?" Detective Olson asked. "Just since those bodies were discovered last year," Van Horn replied. "An informant gave us a tip that Bagger and Big Tony did the crime themselves, but we can't prove it yet." "Then why are they here?" Detective Olson asked. "I don't know," Van Horn replied. "I have an idea," I said. "I've been saying it for a while now. They came here to hurt Holly and me, and I really want to know why." "How did you find out they were here?" Detective Olson asked. "We've been keeping an eye on them," Van Horn explained. "We have their phones listening in, and we even have a tiny listening device in their small social club in Trenton. They never talked about this trip in any of the calls we heard. Big Tony talked a lot about a party he was planning, but no one said what it was for or where it would happen. The only clue we had was that Meatball DeLucia was in Riverton back in March. Then last week, without any sign that they were planning something, the whole group vanished. We might never have found them out here if Bean hadn't used his credit card to buy food at a nearby Chinese restaurant. We had been looking for them for a while, but we hadn't had any luck yet." I almost burst out laughing. I had no trouble tracking down Big Tony and his crew, and I could have easily told Agent Van Horn where they were right then. But I chose not to. "Did you inform Agent Van Horn that 2 of your officers are on Big Tony's payroll?" I asked. Agent Van Horn quickly turned to Detective Barron, surprise on his face. "Is that true?" he asked. "We're not certain," said Detective Barron. It seems Pug and Bean told Mr. Blanchard that Big Tony paid some officers to keep an eye on him. Blanchard will not go to court for shooting his wife, Detective Barron said. Well, that changes everything, Van Horn replied. Big Tony probably already knows I'm here. This makes my visit pointless. I felt a surge of anger. Van Horn didn't seem to care that Big Tony had come to Riverton to hurt Holly and me. He only wanted to blame Big Tony for killing 2 other bad guys. I didn't lose my temper because I felt really sure that Big Tony and his crew were all gone after the explosion at Cheswick Farm. Right then, Detective Barron's phone started to ring. He picked it up and listened for a bit before hanging up. W is coming up, Detective Barron said. Who's WW? Van Horn asked. Walter White, our brave district attorney. Less than a minute later, the DA entered the room. Now there were 5 people in that small room, and it was becoming very warm inside. Detective Olson, is this Mr. Blanchard? Why isn't he in jail? W asked. Because he didn't shoot his wife, and he didn't shoot me, Detective Olson replied. But you looked unhappy, clearly bothered by what Detective Olson had just said. What's happening here? For the next hour, I shared my story again with the district attorney. Then Agent Van Horn explained who Big Tony was and why the FBI was in Riverton searching for him. We were almost done answering all of the DA's questions when a man popped his head in the door. I recognized him as Police Chief Harry Dodson. Chief, what brings you here at this hour? Detective Barron asked him. I was just about to ask you the same thing. I got a call from the fire marshal. There was a big explosion and fire on County Route 15. Was that the loud noise I heard a few hours ago? Detective Barron asked. Most likely. It was the old Cheswick farm. The fire marshal thinks there was a propane leak under the house. Now there is nothing left of the house. The fire department is still searching for people affected, Chief Dodson said. I breathed a little easier when I heard that the fire marshal thought the explosion was an accident. I assumed that house was empty, Detective Olson said. The real estate agent in charge of the house said she had rented it out for 2 months, starting 4 weeks ago. A man named Sam DeLucia signed the lease, but she didn't know how many people would live there. Agent Van Horn became very excited all of a sudden. Have they found any bodies? Who are you? Chief Dodson asked Van Horn. I am Special Agent Kyle Van Horn with the FBI. What brings you here to this fire? The chief asked. I'm here following some organized crime people from New Jersey, and Sam DeLucia was one of them, Van Horn replied. And what are these New Jersey criminals doing in Riverton? The chief wanted to know. We aren't sure yet, Van Horn said. Is anyone even paying attention to me? I shouted. They came here to hurt my wife and me. Who are you? The chief asked. I am Tom Blanchard. Oh, you're the one who tried to hurt your wife and then shot Detective Olson. No, that's not true, Detective Olson said. Then can someone explain why Mr. Blanchard, 2 of my detectives, the DA, and an FBI agent are all here at this hour? The chief asked. So once more I shared my story, and then Agent Van Horn shared his. Honestly, I was losing my patience. Everyone was asking questions, but no one was taking action. With 6 people crammed into the tiny room, it felt almost too hot to bear. Listen, I said loudly. I'm really not happy with the officers here. I've been saying all night that Big Tony is trying to hurt me and my wife. He has paid someone at the hospital to harm Holly tonight, and all of you can do is stand around and be surprised that none of you can figure this out. The DA looked at me with anger and said, That was rude. We are all trying our best to solve this problem. That's not true. All you care about is how this case will impact your run for mayor next year, I replied. Can someone please tell me how you're keeping my wife safe? The room fell silent for a moment. I have someone watching her room, Detective Olson replied. If anyone tries to go in, they will be stopped. Thank you, I said. The quiet didn't last long. The 2 detectives, the FBI agent, the district attorney, and the police chief all began to talk at once, each trying to be heard over the others. I felt like screaming and running away. All I wanted was to leave that room and go to the hospital to be with Holly, but I couldn't even reach the door. Then, to make things worse, another person came in. Oh, there you are, Chief. The man looked around the busy room and then talked to the chief. We have found 4 bodies so far. Just 4? I almost said it out loud. My heart raced as I thought about which 2 members of Big Tony's gang might still be alive after the explosion. The chief then introduced the new person at our Crime Stoppers meeting to Agent Van Horn. Agent Van Horn, this is David Green, our fire marshal. We have looked around the house, or what's left of it, and found 4 bodies. We are still checking the area, but it's very dark outside. It might be morning before we know if there are any other victims. We think we have found 4 people: Thomas Fazio, Mike Soriano, Samuel DeLucia, and George Dugan, all from Trenton, New Jersey. Then Big Tony and Bagger are still around somewhere, Agent Van Horn said. Who are they? The fire marshal asked. I decided to stay quiet this time and let Agent Van Horn explain. We might still find them, the fire marshal said. Then he added, one of my guys found this on the driveway. I think the explosion happened inside the house. I couldn't believe my eyes. The fire marshal gave the chief my voice recorder. It was the one I had kept hidden in the kitchen of the farmhouse. The chief pressed play and we heard voices. Then he hit stop. The chief looked at the device for a bit and found a way to start the recording from the start. Let's see what we have, the chief said. He then pressed play and placed the recorder on the table. The recording started with the noise of a door shutting. I recognized it as the sound of me closing the cellar door as I hurried down the stairs to escape the kitchen before Big Tony and his friends came inside. Then the voices I had heard many times before filled the small room. So what do we do now, boss? The cops don't know where he is, so how are we going to find him? We wait. Maybe those clueless cops will find him. Either way, she is going to pay tonight. Tomorrow, Bean, you and Pug will take Blanchard's car to St. Louis and leave it somewhere. How will you deal with her in the hospital with all those people around? We have a guy, a nurse, working night shifts at the hospital. He plans to see her around 3 in the morning to give her some medicine. No one will know because she is already in a deep sleep. She won't make it to morning and it will seem like she passed away from her injuries. What if they check her after she's gone? Won't they find out about the medicine? Maybe, but we'll be gone before they do anything. Our friend in the hospital is going to leave Blanchard's phone under her bed. Make it seem like Blanchard came to see her. If they find the insulin in her system, the police will think Blanchard went to the hospital to finish what he started. Oh, I see. Good idea. I'm really glad you like it, especially since it's your fault we're in this mess. If you and Bean hadn't messed things up from the start, we'd be back home by now. Bean? Yes, boss. I need you to go into town and get some Chinese food. Can't we just have it delivered? What, are you out of your mind? Nobody knows we're here, and I want to keep it that way. I listened to this while I was hiding in the cellar. After that, the talk shifted to other, less important things. It was then that Van Horn pointed out that all 6 men were inside the house. The chief rewound the tape a bit until we could hear Bean coming back with their Chinese food. We listened as they ate. Bagger then shared the story of how he and Big Tony took down 2 members of a rival gang. We got him now, Van Horn said. After that, they started talking about other stories of their past misdeeds. Then we heard Big Tony say, Bagger, come outside with me so we can chat alone. The others kept telling stories until Porky spoke up. Did you catch that? Catch what? Slim replied. That sound. It's like someone is in the shower. Really, who do you think is taking a shower? I'm not sure, maybe Big Tony. But he's with Bagger. What, you think they're in the shower together? For a moment, it felt very quiet. Then someone shouted, What is that smell? Suddenly, there was a loud bang. After that, a mix of sounds filled the air. I heard sirens, big trucks, and people arguing, but then it all went still. Is there any way anyone in the house could have made it through that explosion? Van Horn asked. No, the fire marshal replied. If there were 6 men in the house, the 2 who are missing must have gone outside before the explosion, the fire marshal explained. If they were in the front yard below the porch, they might have made it. They could have also survived if they went back to the barn. The barn was still standing, but I don't think they would have gone there. Why not? Van Horn asked. There was a car in the barn, the fire marshal said. If they were in the barn when the house exploded, why didn't they use the car to escape? To keep things moving, I asked, what kind of car was it? It was a Mustang. Did you see the license plate number? I asked. It had a special plate. It said Texan. That's my car, I replied, but no one seemed to care about what I said about the car. Do I need to go out there? Agent Van Horn asked. I'll go with you to show you the way, D.A. Walter White offered. It was clear that the D.A. wanted to take advantage of this chance to look important. During his campaign for mayor, he often shared how he had worked with the FBI to solve a big case about organized crime. "You can all follow me," the fire marshal said. "I need to head back outside anyway." Detective Barron glanced at Detective Olson and said, "I should go with them to make sure they stay safe." Now I was alone in the room with Detective Olson. "So, what happens now?" I asked. "Well, you can leave," he replied. "I will tell everyone you are no longer a suspect in your wife's shooting or in mine." "Can you find someone to take me to the hospital? I need to be there for my wife." "I will drive you there myself," Detective Olson replied. "I need to ensure your wife's safety and see how she is doing." It was 3:35 in the morning when I reached Holly's room. As I left the police station, Detective Olson called the hospital to let them know we were on our way. He smiled after he got off the phone. "Hospital security stopped a male nurse who was trying to enter your wife's room with a syringe and some insulin. They are keeping him here for me." "Oh, thank goodness," I said. "That's a relief." When we arrived at the hospital, I went straight to Holly's room. Detective Olson went to the hospital security office to bring in the person who tried to harm Holly. As I entered the room, I gave Holly a gentle kiss on the cheek. She didn't wake up, but I saw her eyes moving under her eyelids. They were quite busy. I pulled a chair next to her bed and was just about to sit down when someone came into the room behind me. I turned to see a doctor in the doorway. "Mr. Blanchard?" he said. "I am Dr. Ravi Shah. The nurse on duty asked me to come and speak with you." "How is she? Has anything changed?" "Mr. Blanchard, your wife is showing some improvement. She still has not woken up, but we have seen some good signs. If you look closely, you can see her eyes moving a lot. She has also moved her arms and legs several times. These signs show she might be waking up from her coma." "When will she wake up?" "I'm not sure yet," Dr. Shah replied. "Are you related to the Dr. Shah who treated my wife on Tuesday?" "Yes, he is my brother." I wasn't sure why I cared about that. I think I just needed to speak to someone who didn't want to either blame me or harm me. "How long will you stay, Mr. Blanchard?" "I'll stay until someone asks me to leave." "That won't happen, Mr. Blanchard." "Blanchard, just a heads up. Nurses and doctors will come in to check on Mrs. Blanchard every 2 hours." "Thank you. I will do my best to stay out of their way." I dozed off in the chair next to Holly's bed for about 5 minutes at a time until it was almost 4:30 a.m. I really needed to go to the bathroom, so I chose to use the one in Holly's room instead of walking down the hall to the public restroom. I had just finished and was about to flush when I heard a voice that made me feel uneasy. "Here's your bird." It wasn't just the words, it was the speaker's British accent that gave me chills. I looked out the bathroom door but didn't see anyone. I started to think that maybe I was just tired and imagined that I heard Bagger talking. I was about to reach for the toilet when I heard the voice again. This time I was sure it wasn't just in my head. "Let's hurry up and get out of here." I glanced back at the bathroom door and saw Bagger and Big Tony getting close to Holly's bed. I quickly searched the bathroom for something I could use to protect myself, but the only thing I found was a metal bedpan. I picked up the bedpan carefully and crept to the bathroom door to peek outside again. The two men were standing by the bed, watching Holly. I began to open the door slowly, trying not to make any noise that would give me away. Just then, Big Tony pulled a gun from his pants and pointed it at Holly's head. I stopped in my tracks. What should I do now? I wondered. I knew I wouldn't reach him in time to stop him from hurting Holly. I was ready to yell as loud as I could to make Big Tony look away from her and maybe get the help of someone at the nurse's desk. But then Bagger stepped in. He grabbed Big Tony's arm and said, "You can't use that gun here. It would be too loud. The police will be here before we can leave the building." Big Tony looked at Bagger for a moment and then said, "You're right." "Use her pillow," Bagger suggested. As Big Tony took the pillow from under Holly's head, I stepped into the room behind Bagger. I held the bedpan in both hands and swung it as hard as I could into the side of Bagger's head. Bagger fell sideways, crashing into the tray table beside Holly's bed. The table and Bagger both fell to the floor. The sound of the tray table hitting the ground was loud, and I hoped someone at the nurse's station would hear it. The noise caught Big Tony's attention. When he turned to look at me, he dropped the pillow and reached for his gun. His hand was on the gun when I hit him hard in the face with the bedpan. The strike to Big Tony's head sent the bedpan flying from my hands and across the floor into the hallway. Big Tony looked confused, but was still trying to get his gun from his pants. I had to act fast, so I grabbed Big Tony's shirt with both hands and shoved him back against Holly's bed. Once I had him pushed back onto the bed, I quickly pulled him sideways. We both tumbled to the floor and I landed on top of him. When we hit the ground, there was a loud bang that made my ears ring. Big Tony had shot his gun but missed me. I didn't give him a moment to try again. I began to hit his head with both of my hands, making his head bounce off the floor with each blow. I lost track of how many times I hit him or how long we were fighting. I only remember that I didn't stop until 2 security guards from the hospital pulled me away. When it finally ended, Big Tony was still breathing, but just barely. I was shocked at how much blood was on the floor. I couldn't believe I had hurt him so badly with just my fists. I looked around and saw Bagger lying on the floor. One of the security guards was holding him down and talking into his radio. I had no clue how long it had been since I last saw Detective Olson until I glanced at the clock in the police station. It was 6:15 a.m. Detective Olson seemed very tired, and I started to worry about how I must look. I hadn't slept well since Wednesday night, and my body ached in many places. We were in the squad room, sitting at Detective Olson's desk, when my favorite crime fighters walked back into the station. That included the district attorney, the chief of police, FBI agent Van Horn, and Detective Barron. It was clear that D.A. White was unhappy about missing what happened at the hospital. He wanted to be involved in catching Big Tony to boost his political career, but the news would air in the morning, and his name would not be mentioned with the arrest. The chief and Detective Barron didn't seem to have strong feelings about it. They looked pleased that Big Tony and Bagger were caught, and now they could go home. Van Horn, however, was really excited. I think he believed that the recording on the voice recorder was enough to help him put Big Tony in jail. What he didn't know was that Detective Olson intended to let Riverton be the first to go after Big Tony. This was because of Big Tony's plans to hurt Holly, and also his threats against me and him. I didn't think Van Horn would be pleased about that. For the next hour, I shared and repeated the story of what took place in Holly's hospital room. Once they finished asking questions, they told me I could get my car back. They found my car keys in Pug Fazio's pocket. After that, they brought my car to the police station. They checked it for fingerprints and looked for any other clues that could help in the case against Anthony Lombardo. When they finished working on the car, I got the keys. Then, around 7:30 that morning, Detective Olson asked me if I wanted to go for breakfast at the Riverton Diner. At 2:35 p.m. on Friday, June 20th, Holly opened her eyes after being in a coma. The hospital called me at my job with great news. 20 minutes later, I walked into Holly's room. For a moment, I thought she looked confused when she saw me, almost like she didn't recognize me. But then her face brightened with a big smile and she reached out her hand. After several sweet kisses, I gently got her to let go of my hand so I could pull a chair close to the bed. Dr. Shaw walked in soon after I got there. He said everything looked good and he believed Holly would recover completely. Holly's biggest issue now was that she couldn't remember everything that had happened to her. Sometimes, it seemed like she didn't really know why she was in the hospital. Dr. Shaw explained that Holly's confusion was a result of the medicines she was taking. He believed that things would become clearer for her in a few hours. Detective Olson had sent a message to the hospital. He wanted to be informed if Holly's health changed, which might allow her to share her story about what happened. Just after 5 o'clock, Detective Olson entered Holly's room. He told us that the FBI asked him to talk to Holly and gather her statement. Detective Olson took out a voice recorder and asked Holly if she was ready to answer some questions. "I'm not sure how much I can help. My memory of what happened is a bit unclear," Holly replied. "I can almost remember it. It's like trying to see something in the dark. You feel like you can see it, but when you focus on it, it just fades away. It's there. Then it disappears." Detective Olson and I went to the cafeteria to have coffee while Holly could take a short break. When we returned to the room a little after 6 o'clock, Holly was awake. It was almost 7 o'clock that evening when something happened. Holly was lying quietly with her eyes closed when I saw a tear begin to slide down her cheek. Soon more tears came and she started to cry. "Oh no, it's all my fault!" Holly cried out. Then she opened her eyes and looked at me. "I almost got you hurt." "What do you mean?" "I remember everything," Holly said, tears rolling down her face. "Can you tell us what happened? Please share as many details as you can," Detective Olson asked. It was Tuesday. I went to the grocery store after work to buy some ground beef for our meatloaf dinner. I arrived home just before 5 o'clock and was about to start dinner when I heard the doorbell ring. I walked to the door and saw two men standing on my porch facing away from me. When I opened the door and asked if they needed help, one of them pushed me back into the house with his hand on my chest. I told them to go away, but they just laughed at me. "Did you know these men?" Detective Olson asked. "Yes. I didn't know who they were at first, but when they walked into the house, memories came back to me. I hadn't seen them in more than 6 years, and I never thought I would see them in Riverton." "Who were they?" "Pug Fazio and Bean Soriano. Pug pushed me into the kitchen and told me to sit at the table. Then Bean asked me when Tom would be home. I told him that Tom usually came home around 5:45. I asked them what they wanted, and Pug said they would wait for Tom to come back. Then they would tell us what they needed. Pug sat down at the table across from me while Bean walked back and forth in the kitchen looking worried. When it hit 6 o'clock and Tom still wasn't there, both of them started to feel even more anxious. At first, I thought Pug and Bean were sent to take me back to Tony. But when they said they would wait for Tom, I realized they wanted to hurt both of us. Holly stared at me, her eyes filled with tears. She said, "I couldn't let them hurt you because of a mistake I made before. When Bean said he heard a car coming and Pug stood up to look outside for you, I ran to the back door to escape. I wished I could find a way to warn you. I thought if they shot me, you might hear the shots and stay inside. That's the last thing I remember." "How did you know these two men?" Detective Olson asked Holly. "They worked for my old boyfriend," she replied. "They worked for Mike?" I asked, feeling surprised. What did Holly's old boyfriend have to do with Big Tony and his group? "Who's Mike?" Holly asked. "Mike, your old boyfriend. Isn't he the one you were trying to get away from when you came to Riverton?" I replied. "I'm really sorry, Tom. I wasn't telling the truth about that. His name wasn't Mike," Holly said. I glanced at Detective Olson, and he just shook his head. I turned back to Holly. "Why did you not tell me his name?" "I had just met you, and I really didn't want to talk about what happened before I left New Jersey," Holly replied. "You never asked again, so I didn't mention it. I guess I should have, but I never thought he would try to find me." "Who did you think would come looking for you?" Detective Olson asked. "Tony Lombardo. When I first left Trenton, I was worried he would come after me. After a few months passed and he had not come back, I thought he would never come for me." "Mrs. Blanchard, can you share your story about Big Tony?" Detective Olson asked. "You know about Big Tony?" Holly replied. "I know a bit. Can you tell me more about him?" "I met Tony when I worked as a public defender in Trenton. I had just finished law school a year ago and was trying to get attention from big law firms. One of the older lawyers in the public defender's office told me to stop by the bar at the Ambassador Hotel after work. He mentioned that many lawyers from nearby firms met there for drinks and to make new connections. He said it would be a good place for me to meet people who could help my job. I began visiting the Ambassador 2 or 3 times a week. One evening I saw a guy standing with Ben Garrison, one of the top defense lawyers in Trenton. He was tall, had a lot of dark hair, and was quite good-looking. He was looking at me. I thought that since he was drinking with Ben, he must be a lawyer too. When I saw him looking at me a lot, even when I walked around the room, I figured I should learn more about him. So I went over and said hello. He told me his name was Anthony Lombardo, but he told me to call him Tony. I asked him which law firm he worked for, and he just laughed. He mentioned that he didn't work for any of the local law firms, but a few of them had worked for him at different times. "When he told you his name, you didn't realize he was a criminal?" Detective Olson asked. "No. When I asked what he did for a job, he simply said he was a businessman. I had a drink with Tony that night, then I went home. A few nights later, I saw him again at the Ambassador. He asked me if I wanted to have dinner with him. He told me he had a work idea he wanted to talk about. While we were having dinner, Tony said he wanted to hire me as his personal and business lawyer. He quickly explained what I would need to do and how much he would pay me. His offer was almost double what I earned as a public defender, and it seemed like a great chance for me to build my reputation. I was young and a bit innocent, and Tony seemed larger than life to me. I thought he was great, and I really liked him a lot. Tony began to take me out for dinner a few times each week. Then one night after we ate, Tony looked at me and said, "I want you to come home with me and stay for the night." Tom, I know this is tough for you to hear, but please remember this all happened long before I met you, Holly said. I know. It's fine, I replied, even though I wasn't sure if it really was fine. I needed to know the whole story to make up my mind. After that night, not only was I Tony's lawyer, but I also became his girlfriend. 2 months later, I moved into his house. Soon after, things started to get complicated. That's when I began to see what Tony truly did for a living. He would discuss illegal plans right in front of me. I grew worried that if Tony got in trouble, I could also be in danger. I could have lost my job. I spoke with Tony about my concerns. He told me that as his lawyer, I had nothing to worry about. He thought everything I overheard was private, just between us. But that wasn't quite right. I told Tony I didn't want to be his lawyer anymore. That's when I saw a mean side of him for the first time. He said there was only one way I could stop working for him, and it would not be good for me. I could hear the warning in his voice and see it in the cold look he gave me when he spoke. He smiled after making his threat and said, "You are my lawyer and my girlfriend until I say it's over." "So what made you decide to leave?" Detective Olson asked. One night I went into the kitchen and saw Tony talking to Nigel Needham. "You mean Bagger?" Detective Olson cut in. "How did you know that? Please go on." Well, Bagger and Tony were discussing a problem they had with some guys. Tony told Bagger, "We need to make them go away." Then Tony looked at me and warned me to forget what I heard, or I might also be in trouble. Later that night, after Tony fell asleep, I packed a small bag with only what I could carry, and I left. I spent the night at a low-cost motel. In the morning, I went to the bank, took out all my money, and closed my account. I drove all day and into the next day until my check engine light came on. By then, I had reached Riverton. "I thought this place might be safe," I said, so I applied for a job at the diner. I used my middle name, Holly, instead of my first name, Jean. I thought that using Holly might make it harder for Tony to find me. Holly looked at me and said, "I'm sorry I wasn't honest about my past. Back then, I didn't realize I would fall in love with you and that we would marry, but I should have been honest with you anyway. Can you forgive me?" "I already have." "But what will we do about Tony now? He won't stop until something bad happens to one of us." "Don't worry. Big Tony won't trouble either of you for a long time. He and Bagger are both in jail now and will probably spend the rest of their lives there," Detective Olson said. He looked at me and said, "You know, Big Tony isn't Big Tony anymore." "What do you mean?" I asked. "Remember when his gun went off during your fight?" "Yeah, I remember," I replied. "He shot himself. The bullet went through his thigh." "That's right. But before the bullet hit his thigh, it caused a serious injury. The doctors could only save a little bit. I heard that the other people in the prison hospital are now calling him Shorty," Detective Olson said with a grin. "You got into a fight with Tony?" Holly asked. "He had to. Big Tony was going to smother you with a pillow. Your husband took down both Tony and Bagger using a bedpan. What happened to the others, Pug and Bean?" "The rest of Tony's group is gone." "They died when the house they were renting exploded?" Detective Olson asked. "How did the house explode?" "The fire marshal thinks it was because of a propane gas leak," Detective Olson said, glancing at me. "Isn't Cheswick Farm close to the woods where you were hiding after you got away from Pug and Bean?" Detective Olson didn't wait for a reply. He turned back to Holly and said, "I'll let you two talk now. Your husband can share what happened after you were shot. I'm really happy to see you getting better, and I hope we can meet again when things are simpler." Holly laughed and cried as I shared my story. When I talked about Porky and Slim and how the fire ants helped me, Holly giggled so much I thought she might hurt herself. Then her laughter turned to tears. "I don't want to hurt any ants ever again. If it weren't for those fire ants, you wouldn't be here with me. If I lost you, I don't know how I would go on. This is all my fault, and I hate what you had to face. The only way this could have been stopped is if I had never met you, and I don't even want to think about that," I replied. "Without you, I would still be eating most of my meals at the diner. I kissed Holly and then said, "We have the rest of our lives for you to make this up to me. Right now, all you need to do is get better. You do remember you promised to have a child with me, right?" "Or a daughter," Holly said. "Or both?" Hey, audience, if you like this video and want to keep up with more thrilling stories, make sure to subscribe to Prince Cheating Tales and hit the notification bell. You don't want to miss out on our upcoming adventures. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next wonderful story.